Irish Breakdown Nation. Welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast. It is Tuesday, February 11th. The offseason is rolling. We're a couple days out from Valentine's Day. So, ladies and gents, make sure that you get your plans finalized, dinner reservations in there. I got my flowers ordered today because Lauren works about 45 minutes away from here and I work from home. So, whatever you guys got to do, make sure that you guys get ready for it. But outside of Valentine's Day,
Angela's birthday's on Sunday as well, so I kind of have to go. I always have to do those kind of back to back, which kind of works for flowers because I can get her one big bouquet and then just But hey, real quick, this is not a company that we are sponsored by. This is just a company that I've used, but I actually have a monthly subscription to a place called Bouqs.com, Bouqs.com. And you can actually have like a monthly subscription, and then they'll kind of like pick flowers for you. They send it the first of every month is what I do. But you can go in there and edit whatever you want to do. And my wife loves tulips and roses. So you can go in there and pick out those different orders. And so she loves them. So if your wife, and it's easy to do because you don't have to like go to the store. They travel great. There's only been one time they ever arrived damaged and they replaced it for free, like within a week. So really cool company. Again, we're not sponsored by them. It's just, as a husband, my advice to you guys, if your wife likes flowers, this is a really easy way to do it. And they're really good flowers. They're better than what I get, from Martin's down the street. So just a little something for you guys there. Bouqs.com is a really cool place that we use. So yeah, there you go. Check it out.
Well, there we go. Be sure to check out Bouqs.com. But before we get to Valentine's Day, before we get to all the fun festivities for Angel's birthday on Sunday, we got a lot of football we got to talk about because offseason is still rolling, baby. So we have some topics we're going to cover today. The big one being Notre Dame's passing offense. Now, we've talked a lot about it so far this offseason, but we're really going to sit down and take some time today to dive into the improvements. And we're going to start big picture. We're going to start with the why. And some of it might sound a little obvious to some, but we're going to dive into why the passing offense has to improve. And we're going to kind of dive into, some of the issues. And we're going to talk through what has kind of prevented Notre Dame from taking that next step into becoming a more efficient passing offense. We're going to talk through what we must see. And we're going to talk through what 2025 should look like based on personnel, based on the coaching coming back. Speaking of the coach coming back, we're going to talk about reasons for optimism. Hint, hint, Mike Denbrock may or may not be in that list. And then we're going to wrap everything up today with a mailbag. We're going to go for about an hour. So throughout the show, guys, whatever questions pop into your mind, whichever ones that may have not gotten answered in other shows or something that just pops in spur of the moment, be sure to throw it into the chat. And then as always, super chats get bumped up to the top. But Bryan, before we jump into everything, how you doing today, man?
Man, I'm great. We're talking pass game. I always get excited about this. And, we're going to kind of, throughout the offseason, break down the team and look at areas where, boy, this is a strength. It's got to stay a strength. I'm going to have some film breakdowns to match this. I'm not sure when they'll come out, but I'm going to break down different parts of the pass game and things that we like and things that we don't like. And that, of course, be on the premium board. But I'm excited about this one because we've talked about this before on the show about how the pass game's got to get better. And in some ways, I think they made some improvements this year, which we'll kind of jump into in certain areas. And we'll explain like what we mean. There's this notion that, well, you got to look like LSU 2019 or Bama 2020. I'm like, no, you don't. But there are certain things that if you look at the teams that are winning championships and teams that are winning consistently year to year, especially over a period of time, there's things that are common. They don't all do the same thing. Some teams run the ball effectively. Some teams don't. Some teams play great defense. Some teams play good defense, but they're elite on offense. There's different aspects of it. Some teams are zone scheme. Some teams are gap scheme. I mean, there's all types of different ways to win. But there are certain things you can look at and say, these are some consistent ingredients to championship teams. Now, there's anomalies here and there, but these are sort of the key ingredients. And here's where Notre Dame is in this area. And here's where Notre Dame's got to get to. And I felt like since we just kind of talked about the quarterbacks the other day, that it'd be kind of a good time to go right into the pass game and jump into like, hey, look, here's what we like, here's what we don't like. And if Notre Dame wants to compete for a championship, not just, get there, but compete for a championship, but then to do it with some consistency, Trev, that's the other big thing, right? Is not just to do it, get to the championship game once every, 10, 12 years, which they did, 2012 and then 2024. But to actually get there and win it, to be able to win those big games on a consistent basis, There's just certain things they're going to have to be able to do. And we're going to break all that down. And I'm very much excited about that. And I think this is a great place to start. Because like with run game, it's like there's going to be things we're going to break down that, they can get better here and maybe make some adjustments there. But it's like you're pretty good at running football. Just keep doing what you're doing, you know what I mean? But it's going to come down to when teams are going to say, well, we're not going to let you run the ball on us. Can you still beat them and still put up big numbers and still be a dominant football team? And that's where Notre Dame has got to get to.
I love talking passing offense. Obviously, a little bias. You're talking to two former quarterbacks here. So for me, this is what I love diving into. So in that good spirit, let's kind of dive into where we're going to start here. And we're going to talk about, Bryan, you touched on it. Notre Dame has to improve here, but what's the why behind it? Like I said, some of it might be obvious, but the other is you look at the comparisons and you look at the commonalities between teams that have won the national championship in years past. So what does it mean, right? And Bryan, when you look at these numbers that you compiled here, what does some of the data tell us about passing offenses that have won the national championship?
Well, number one, it tells you, Trevor, that in this era, in this common era, there's still different ways to win. People love to pigeonhole it into, well, this team that's winning now does this, so everybody needs to be like that. And I've never been one of those people. I've never been one of those people that jumps into the whole, well, this is the best team in the country, so you've got to be what they are. I've like that never works, because by the time you catch up to where they are, they're going to have evolved in advance and they're going to still be ahead of you. It's about figuring out who we are, what we can be as a program, where we can be dominant, and then just trying to make sure that we looking at it from just a team trying to compete with the best teams, make sure that we can build ourselves up to where we can be the best version of ourselves in a way that can compete with them. So it's not about chasing those teams, because all these teams that you look at in this statistical breakdown, they do things very differently. Ohio State's very different from Michigan, who was very different from Georgia, who was very different from the way Alabama was in 2020. And Clemson and LSU was in 19. And then those teams are actually probably the two most similar is Alabama and LSU, but they were all very different than how Clemson does things. And there's just certain things that you look at, Trevor, and say there's certain commonalities between all of those teams. And when you look at Notre Dame, you say, well, look, they're obviously not in that same range. They're not competing with those teams in those areas. They're way off of where those teams are. And if they want to compete with those teams on a regular basis, they're going to have to be more effective in those certain areas. And the reality is you can say this, well, Notre Dame's got to throw the ball like LSU did or like Alabama does. No, they don't. They just have to be, with what they're doing, they have to be a lot better at it. It's not something that requires you to say, well, you got to go away from being O-line U and go away from having great running backs, and you've got to just go out there and get the next Jamar Chase and Jamar Jefferson. It's like, well, no, you don't. You just have to make sure that you still be great at what you do, but you have to be better at it. And you have to say, hey, how are we falling short? Why are we falling short in the big games? Because that's the other thing is we're going to talk about these statistics right here. But the other part of it's going to be is there's some times where Notre Dame has had good statistics overall over the course of a season, but their team is not effective because they don't do those things in the big games. And last year, meaning 2023, is going to be a big example of that. And we're going to explain kind of what that means. So it really just comes down to becoming a team that's more dynamic in every area of offense. And that's something that Notre Dame has been falling behind. And in order to get to that level, they're going to have to be there. Because, we'll dive into it, Trev, but there's some specifics that you see here for these teams, and we'll dive into it here. We'll dive to it more as we get into it. But there's just some things that we've looked at as we study the data that tells us, hey, they've got to be better here. But it's one thing to look at the data, and it's another thing to say, Trev, why that data matters. What impact does that data have? How does that impact you, practically speaking, as a football team on game day? And that's more important than just looking at numbers and saying, hey, you got to get to 9 yards an attempt. Okay, well, that only tells me a certain part of the story. Let's get into the why, and that'll be part of this conversation as well.
Context when you look at these numbers is everything. And you brought up Notre Dame's 2023 stats, their breakdowns for the passing offense. And that, I think, provides some really, really good context as to why your goal as an offensive coordinator, why your goal as a team, as a passing offense can't just be, well, let's just get to that number. It has to be when those numbers come into effect, right? The grandest of stages. You know, you going through and you just take a look at what Notre Dame's offense did this year with Riley Leonard. It was almost a tale of two different halves in the playoffs. Against IU, 6.3 yards per attempt. Against Georgia, it was 3.8, but they passed for 90 yards. But then you go through and you look at the shift and what happened with Penn State and with Ohio State. Riley Leonard finished the game with 9.7 yards per attempt against Penn State. Ended the game with 8.2 yards per attempt against Ohio State. And you saw it at times throughout the regular season. He finished the game with 11.7 yards per attempt against Army. That was a really good passing performance. And what we talked about with the quarterbacks in a previous show was you could tell when Riley Leonard was feeling it early and when he wasn't. And that the Army game was one of those games is when he was feeling it early. But the level of consistency that it has to happen at needs to grow in 2025. There's a lot of different reasons to be optimistic, which we'll talk through later. There's a lot of different things they can do schematically to help improve those numbers. But moral of the story is the passing offense has to become more dynamic. I love that you use that word. And it has to become more consistent because at other times we've seen it's been really great against Central Michigan. It's been really great against the service academies who are quality programs. But let's just call a spade here. You're not going to be facing an Army or Navy secondary in the semifinals of the college football playoff. So for all those reasons, Notre Dame's pass offense is going to have to improve.
I mean, you look at the numbers, Trevor, and that's what the teams that have won championships in recent years have done. That's their numbers, right? So you see some variances in there. You look at 28.4 attempts per game. So what these numbers mean, APG is attempts per game, CPG is completions per game, PCT is the completion percentage, yards per game, that's obvious, YPA is yards per attempt, YPC yards per completion, TDs, INTs, and then quarterback rating. And you start to see certain floors, but you also see some variances, right? I mean, what you saw from Michigan in 2023 is a lot closer to what we saw from Georgia in 2021, but very different from what Georgia was in 2022, and different, obviously, from what Clemson was in 2020 and 2018. And I'm at some very interesting comparisons between that Clemson team in 2018 and Notre Dame in 2018. So, but the other part of it too is, Trev, is it's not just about the numbers, it's about the overall impact that those numbers have. And can you have them in big games? Because when you look at Notre Dame, it's not just that their numbers don't compare. And I'm going to pull this up. So you look at completion percentage, lowest one on there is 64.9. And then you look at Notre Dame in the same period, they've been over 64.9 once. What year was that? It was this year. It was with Riley Leonard. You look at Notre Dame and saying, okay, well, you look at the comparison of these other teams. It's yards per attempt. The lowest was 8.2. The next lowest after that was 8.9. And that 8.2 team has got a little bit of an asterisk because they were a lot more dynamic later in the year as their true freshman quarterback got more and more experience. And that obviously played a big role in it. So you can say, okay, well, they were only 8.2 over the course of the season. But look at what they did in the postseason. Trevor Lawrence was 8.4 against Notre Dame in the semifinals, and then 10.8 against Alabama. He was 10.9 against South Carolina. So you started to see that get better and better and better. Clemson that year was 10.8 in a win, or Trevor was 10.8 and 10.3 in a win over Texas A&M as part of the rotation for that. But just overall, you saw that get better and better and better as the season went on after they made the quarterback change. And so that factors into the conversation as well, because as a team they were at 8.2. Trevor was actually at 8.3. So as the other quarterbacks were a little bit higher than him, but they also they went 1 of 6 on non-quarterback throws. So that's another thing that I thought was very interesting. They went 1 of 6 for 2 yards. So if you take that, let's go ahead, 4185. If you look at the numbers, I thought this was kind of interesting. But if you actually look at that and divide it by, you take out those other passes, they were actually 8.33, which gets you a little bit higher than that 8.2, but the point is still the same. But as I said, in the big games, they were a lot better than that. But that was also the true freshman quarterback. You look at Notre Dame in the last 6 years. How many times have they even been over? And that 8.2 is the anomaly. That's the low number. Look at Notre Dame in that same period of time. They've been over 8.2 once. That's the low number. They've only been in that range where the other teams are, which is around that 8.9 to 9 or higher average. They've only done that once, and that was last year with Sam Hartman. Well, then you say, okay, well, that's pretty good. Maybe you need another Sam Hartman type of guy. Well, I mean, that's a different conversation for a different day. But here's the rub. Against Ohio State, 7.0 yards per attempt. Against Duke, 7.4. Against Louisville, 6.7. Against USC, 6.3. Against Clemson, 4.9. So in your biggest games of the year, you were way below that. Why did they rank 9.1? 10.9 against Army or Navy, 11.4 against Tennessee State, 12.7 against Central Michigan, 11.5 against a Pitt team that was 3-9, 9.6 against a Wake Forest team that was 4-8, and 10.0 against that was Sam Hartman, against a Stanford team that was also 3-9. And then you look at what Steve Angeli did in his start. They went 12.2 against an Oregon State team that was depleted. That's not meant to be a knock on Steve Angeli. The point is to simply show Notre Dame's pass offense can do those things against inferior opponents. What they have not been able to do is to do those things in the biggest moments. And we started to see that a little bit this year, Trev. Like you mentioned, 9.7 from Riley Leonard against Penn State, 8.2. Now, we'll break down like, okay, you barely won the one game and you lost the other game because you didn't start doing that till the second half when you were down. But we'll get to that. But you started to see that against Army, a ranked team, 11.4 this season in that category. But then there was 3.8 against Georgia. There was 6.3 against Indiana. So you started to see Louisville was only 7.1. Texas A&M was only 5.3. So you say that there's still plenty of room to improve. But you look at these numbers, Trev, and Notre Dame's way below most years in a lot of these categories. And you'll see yards per catch the last couple of years has been a little bit lower. Notre Dame is kind of on point with a lot of those. This year they were not. But again, when you dive into the data, you'll see that it was much lower. Touchdown to interception ratio, Notre Dame is not that far off what some of these teams have been. I think Notre Dame's touchdown to interception ratio this year was fine. I had no issue with it. Because you had a lot of you got a lot of situations where a lot of teams might throw inside the 5, but between Riley Leonard and Jeremiah Love, it's like, why throw down there when you have two dynamic short yardage or
Sure.
red zone type of guys? But overall, those numbers are fine compared to other teams. It's not so much that it's the when and the how. Obviously, look at 2018. Some of those numbers are a little bit skewed from the difference between when the Brandon Wimbush era to the Riley Leonard era. And then the last part's quarterback rating. You look at Notre Dame, the lowest is 154.65. The next lowest after that's 161.98. Notre Dame has only been over 150 twice. 153 back in 19. But again, as we talked about, Trevor, that was a year where Notre Dame played a really soft schedule and did not perform well in the big games that season. So if you actually look at their 2019 passing against Georgia, the game they lost, 5.9 yards per attempt, 116.38 passer rating. Against Michigan, the other game they lost, 4.6 yards per attempt, 99.21 passer rating. Their ranking that year was as high as it was because they went for 264.19 against Navy. They went for 271.31 against New Mexico. They went for 256.89 against Bowling Green. They had a couple dominant performances against really bad teams, 172.07 against a bad Iowa State team. But against some of the better teams in the schedule, they were not good. As I mentioned, the 116 against Georgia, only 145 against Louisville, 123 against Virginia, 106.75 against USC, 112.88 against Virginia Tech. And so you started to play some of these better teams and your numbers plummet. So the numbers are skewed by dominant performances. But when you look at a lot of the teams that are winning championships, they're actually staying closer to their season-long averages against those better teams. You never like do better against the best teams than you do the worst teams. That's just not how it works. But you don't have these giant drop-offs. And that's what we've seen from Notre Dame in the pass game. And then the other piece too is, like I mentioned before, is the completion percentage factors into that. The yards per attempt factors into that. A lot of that goes into that rating average. And then for the most part, they do turn the ball over a little bit more in the pass game than a lot of those teams have as well. You know, they went 8, 9, 11, and 10 the last 4 years. The championship teams have been 10, 5, 7, and 12. To a degree, I can live with that a little bit, though, as long as it's for the right reasons. But if you break down those numbers, they're not exactly happening for the right reasons. They're bad picks. They're pick sixes. They're drive-killing interceptions. They're not the 3rd and 9, you know, it's your own 45 shot you take that gets picked off down the field. I can live with that. That's fine. These are devastating turnovers in a lot of in past years where it's pick sixes or setting the other team up for short fields or just killing, you know, comeback attempts with those type of plays. And so I did find it fascinating, Trevor, to see how many areas where Notre Dame is just so woefully fallen short. But I also think you have to be able to look and say some years you've had a guy like a Riley Leonard in 2024 that was able to overcome the lack of passing success because he was so dynamic with his legs. But you can't count on that in a lot of years. Riley Leonard is a bit of a unique player. You're going to have to get a lot better throwing the football. And not just under Riley Leonard. This isn't even because it can come across as like, well, you know, Riley, you don't have Riley anymore. Guys, this has been a problem at Notre Dame for a long time. And I can go back. I mean, the last time I'd say Notre Dame probably threw the ball at a really championship level was back in 2009 with Jimmy Clausen. But that team stunk because why? You couldn't run the football and you play terrible defense. So this isn't the only thing, but this is Notre Dame already has a lot of ingredients that are there to be a championship team defensively, run game wise. Now it's time to get this part of the offense going. And honestly, that's a big reason why Mike Denbrock was brought in to run the offense. I mean, because Mike Denbrock is not an air raid, pass happy guy. He understands the importance of being able to throw the football, but he's also someone who understands that we've got to be more dynamic throwing the football. And if you look at it, Trevor, I'm going to pull this up again. It's not the volume that bothers me. Notre Dame the last 3 years, 27.8, 27.0, 26.0. Ohio State this year was at 28.4. Michigan was at 24.1. Georgia in 2021 was at 27.1. The attempts are not there. You got to be more efficient with it. You got to be more explosive with it. And that's going to be a big part of it. Because one number I didn't put in here that's going to look very different if you bring in those other teams is going to be big plays. And that's something that Notre Dame lacked this year and honestly lacked in a lot of years, is being able to get those big passing plays from scrimmage, those you know, the home run type of plays. And this year, for example, they had 5 passing plays of 40 yards or more. Michigan the year before only had 5 as well in one more game. But as I've pointed out, Michigan's the anomaly. They're the team that you can't look at and say, well, that's what you've got to be. But, you know, it shows you don't have – but the reason I'd still point to that is it shows you don't have to be LSU 2019 either. There's a happy medium between that and the anomaly that was Michigan. But when you look at a lot of the other teams, Trevor, they're getting a lot more than that. But you don't have to be this team that's just airing it out, chucking it all over the field. Just, you know, it's about the efficiency part. Notre Dame this year had 16 plays of 30 yards or more in the pass game. Georgia in 2022, when they had their best pass offense, only had 23 in 15 games. Now, that's obviously more, but it's not like they were out there just bombing people with it. What's funny is if you look at Georgia, let me pull this back up. What's interesting is Georgia in 2021 averaged 8.1 yards per attempt, and Georgia in 2022 had 8.0, very similar yards per catch. But what's interesting is Georgia 2021 had 30 plays of 15 to 30 yards or more, where the year before they only had 23. Well, they threw it a lot more that first year that they won the title in 21. Actually, that's Notre Dame. Excuse me. I'm looking at the wrong team. So Georgia in 2021 was 9.3. The second year, they were 9.0 yards per attempt. They were at 14.3 in 2021, 13.2 in 2022. So those are very similar numbers. Quarterback rating 168 to 161. What was different? One year they threw it a lot more than the other year. What's interesting, though, is the year they threw it less, they had more big plays. So in 2021, they had more big plays. They had 30 plays of 30 yards or more compared to just 23 in 2021. And so I did find that pretty interesting looking at it. They had 8 plays of 50 yards or more in 2021. And in 2022, they had 5. So even though they threw it a lot more in 2022, model the 2021 season, and you're going to be fine. Obviously, you want to limit the interceptions, but they threw the ball 5 times less. They were right on par with where Notre Dame is, 27.1 attempts per game. Notre Dame this past year was at 27.8. They were at 17.6 completions. Notre Dame was at 18.5, so Notre Dame was better there. Completion percentage, Notre Dame was better. Notre Dame had 66.5. Georgia was at 64.9. But look at the big difference. 9.3 yards per attempt, 14 3-point yards per completion. Notre Dame was at 7-1 and 10-7. Notre Dame's 2023 numbers are almost identical to what Georgia was in 2021 in a lot of different areas. But again, I point to it's not just about the raw numbers. It's also about how you put those numbers together. And when you look at Georgia in 2021, Trevor, 10.7 against yards per attempt against Michigan, and the semis 8.6 against Alabama in the championship game. That's the difference. 12.5 in a win over a ranked Kentucky team. That's the difference. That's the difference of why this team was effective, is because they were able to do it. And then you look at the Alabama game in the title game, they went 17 of 26, only threw for 224 yards, but at 8.6 yards per attempt, and had a quarterback rating of 163. In the conference championship game against Bama, they went 29 of 48 for 340 yards, 3 touchdowns, but they got blown out because they threw 2 picks and only averaged 7.1 yards per attempt. So efficiency and explosiveness is better than volume. And that's something that you have to understand, but then being able to do it in the big moments, that's the big key. Alabama in 2022, or Georgia in 2022, in the SEC title game, semifinal game, and championship game, 9.4 yards per attempt, 11.7, and 12.0. And their win over then, I think, number 1 or number 2 ranked Tennessee, 10.3 yards per attempt. And a win over a ranked South Carolina team, 11.3. And a win over Oregon, 11.9. So in 2022, overall, their numbers were not as good as they were in 2021, but they were way better in the big moments. And that's the key. That's the key.
And to paint the picture of how much the big moments mean, Bryan, if you could you switch over to the Notre Dame stats when you get the chance? When you go through and you look at what this means for Notre Dame specifically, one, why does this impact matter? Why does it matter that the offense improves from a passing game standpoint in efficiency numbers? Well, in 3 of these years that's listed out here, Notre Dame made the playoffs. Right? So we're not talking about some 8-5 team that, man, if their passing was better, maybe they would have won a national championship. This past season, they played in one. In 18 and 20, they were in the semifinals. Now, mind you, it was a 14 playoff, but it was still the college football playoff semifinals. So you go through and you look at what those numbers mean. And in the big moments, to paint this picture, in 2023, they had more yards per game. They averaged more yards per attempt. They averaged more yards per catch, and they had more passing touchdowns. And the passer rating was higher. However, the difference in the big moments is Riley Leonard went for 8.2 against Ohio State in the national championship. He went for 9.7 against Penn State in the semifinals. That 2023 passing offense wouldn't have done that based on what the numbers tell us. And that's the biggest difference, right? That's the difference between, you can't just look at the raw numbers without context, because if I were to just show this, even if you take the name out of it, even if you take Notre Dame out of there and you just look at 24 and 23, if I were to ask people who had the better passing offense, the resounding answer would be 2023 based on the numbers. But when you look at everything with context, and when you look at what they did in those moments with those numbers, 24 was trending in the right direction in terms of when it was happening, right? The big moments, the big games. And that's the picture that we're trying to paint, is Notre Dame's this close. Right? There's aspects of their team that needs to remain consistent. They still need to be able to run the ball at a high level. They still need to have an elite defense. And when you go through and you look at 2018 through 2024, that was pretty consistent. They had really good defenses in those years. They were able to run the football really efficiently in those years. This is the area of the offense that fluctuates for many different reasons that we're going to continue to break down throughout the show. But when you just look at the direction that they're trending in, the personnel groups that are going to be there in 2025, what it means for Denbrock's second year, that's what leaves people excited about what this could potentially look like. But to paint the picture of why that's so important, it's that. It's what do those numbers mean in the big moments? Because Riley Leonard was above 7.1 yards per attempt in the semifinals and in the national championship game. If that can continue to improve, it's going to be huge. It's going to be really huge for this offense, Bryan.
There's no doubt. I mean, and again, it's the formula's there. Knowing what to do is not the problem. The problem is can you then go out and do it? And Trevor, when that's really when you have these conversations, that's really what it comes down to. Is we know the recipe. We know what needs to happen. We know what this team needs to do. But the question is, can you then go out there and do it? And it's kind of like, look, I can identify what your sickness is, but I can't do anything about it. Like, hey, I know what that sounds like. That you got a cold, you got the flu. All right, cool. We've identified the problem. Now let's go fix it. What should I do? I don't know. My mom always tells me what to do. I have no clue what you should do. I'm just letting you know that's what the deal is, that you have the flu. I just thought you'd want to know that. And so that thing is, can you fix it? Can you fix the problem? And that's what Notre Dame is, going to have to be able to do is be able to identify the problem, because at the end of the day, man, it's as you mentioned, you're just gonna have to be better in those moments. You're gonna have to be better in those big games. And you look at this year compared to last year. I love that you pointed that out, because last year Sam Hartman played in what I would consider 6 big games against teams that were ranked. And when you look at the results, they weren't good. I mean, they weren't good. He didn't do enough. I mean, yeah, you averaged more yards per attempt, but last year in those 6 big games, he threw 9 touchdown passes. This year, Riley Leonard threw 8. 4 of those touchdown passes came in one game against NC State. And then in the rest of them, in the other 5 games, he threw 5 touchdowns and he threw 5 picks. And you just look at it and you're just like, that's just not good enough. And that's been the story for a long time. And there was times this year. This isn't a defend Riley Leonard and let's convince everyone how great Riley Leonard was, because there was times this year that Riley Leonard wasn't good enough as a passer. The Georgia game, let's be honest, he wasn't good enough as a passer in that game. He had one moment where he had to step up and make a play, and he made it. That's great. But at the same time, it's like, yeah, but, he didn't overall. But what was the difference? Is Riley Leonard at least had that one trait that could kind of get you over the top. And past quarterbacks haven't had that. Past quarterbacks, I mean, you could look at like a Brandon Wimbush and guys like that, but we're talking about he was so far below as a passer. It's just a different conversation. But when you look at like a Sam Hartman, if he wasn't on throwing the football, he wasn't going to be effective. I mean, he couldn't help you. Whereas Riley Leonard can go pass for 90 yards in a game and beat Georgia. I mean, that's the difference. And you can't always count on that. That's the thing, is you can't always count on that. And here's the other thing I'll give credit to Riley Leonard for this year. He usually made big plays with his arm when it mattered. Like, even if you look at the Georgia game, he made a couple really clutch throws in that game, even though overall he didn't do anything throwing the football. You look at the Texas A&M game, he didn't throw the ball very well against Texas A&M overall, but he had a couple big throws on that last drive where Notre Dame was trying to win the football game. And you look at the same thing against Penn State. I mean, he had 2 huge mistakes in that game. But when the game was on the line, Riley made the plays he needed to make. Same thing against Ohio State to battle back. Same thing against Indiana, even those overall numbers weren't good. And you need that. But at the same time, you also then need to have all those other things. You can't have and this has been the issue. You've got this issue, you got that issue. You're great here, you're great there, but then it's those other things that hold them back. And at some point in time, Notre Dame's going to have to get to the point where throwing the football, whether throwing it 20 times a game or 40 times a game, and I hope they're never at 40 times a game, because that's probably a bad sign. But it's just, you need to be better at it when you do it. You need to be more dangerous with it when you do it. And at the end of the day, the numbers show that. And why? You've got to protect your pass game better. You've got to be able to be more balanced, to force teams to defend you more straight up, as opposed to teams that are just focusing on stopping your run. And if they are going to focus on stopping your run, you need to be able to make them pay in a big, big way. And Notre Dame wasn't able to do that enough. They did it for about a full game in the playoff, in the semifinals and the championship, if you look at the second half of each game. But because they couldn't do it in the first half, they weren't as effective with it. And so those are the things you look at, Trevor, and say, it makes you better. If you can throw the ball better, you're going to be better on third down. If you throw the ball better, you're going to be able to score more. If you throw the ball better, you're going to be able to run the ball more effectively at Notre Dame. And now some teams throw, and that's the focus of their offense. Notre Dame doesn't need to be that. We are not advocating for that. We are of the belief. I shouldn't speak for both of us, Trevor. I get this impression from you, but you haven't exactly said it. Notre Dame should always be a team that puts a great deal of emphasis on being able to run the football as well as any team in the country. Again, not from a volume standpoint, but from an effectiveness standpoint. But in order to do that, you have to have a passing game that is more complementary, more effectively complementary than what you've had in a lot of years. And even the one year, if you look at like 2021, where Notre Dame had some really good pass game numbers, 282.5 yards per game, had this third highest completion percentage of that time under Jack Cohn. You had 8.1 yards per attempt, 12.7 yards per completions, 30 touchdowns, decent passer rating. If you look at just Jack Cohn's rating of what it was that season, there's a lot of things that you look at that you like, Trevor. Jack Cohn that year was actually 151.83 as a pass with his passer rating. So just kind of looking at it from that standpoint of where he was actually higher because Ian Book. So 2019 Notre Dame's passer rating is 153.48. I should have put the starter passer rating because Ian Book was only 149.13. They were there because Phil Jurkovec went 12 of 16 for 222 yards and had 2 touchdowns. He averaged 13.9 yards per attempt and had a passer rating of 232.8. That jumped that rating up. Oh, and Brendan Clark threw 1 pass that year and went for a 22-yard touchdown. So your backup quarterbacks went 13 of 17 for 244 yards, 3 touchdowns, and no picks, and had a passer rating that was probably in the 400s. So that dragged that number up. It was really 149, whereas Jack Cohn was at 151.83 that season and had a completion percentage of 65.5 and did a lot of good things. And I've said in the past that if Jack Cohn would have had one more year left and could have been on that team in 2022, that Notre Dame would have been real, real dangerous. Why do I say that? Because in 2021, even with Kyron Williams, who was a heck of a player, Notre Dame's run game stunk. Kyron rushed for 1,005 yards, but only went for 4.9 yards per carry. Why? Because your offensive line was a mess. You only averaged 144 yards a game. Could you imagine what Jack Cohn could have done in 2022 with an offense that averaged 189.1 rushing yards per game? Could you imagine that? No. And so that's what's saying is like you got to be able to put it all together. And right now, I believe that Notre Dame is on the verge of having the type of run game needed to be a championship team, and we saw that this year. But where Notre Dame got in trouble in the postseason is when teams put all their chips into stopping the run game, and the Notre Dame offensive line struggled to have good performances in the run game. They didn't have a pass game good enough to really to win those games in the degree they could. But we did see some flashes, Trev. And the Penn State game was a great example of that, second half against Ohio State. But because you couldn't do it for 4 quarters is why you needed that comeback late in both games. And that's where they've got to get to. So they've had it at times, but not enough. And that's what we're going to have to see moving forward is they can do it more consistently and more effectively.
Complementary football is going to be a huge, huge thing to talk about in 2025. And I look to almost the anomaly year, but you could say this consistently throughout, but I like using this example, is J.J. McCarthy in the 2023 season. Because he's somebody that I've given him my fair share of flack for. I didn't think he was elite and yada, yada, yada. But you go through and you look at what is a balanced offense.
He wasn't, by the way. You're not wrong on that. But
agreed. Yeah. But with that being said, Michigan's passing offense did what they needed to depending on what the game was. And that is something that can't be said for Notre Dame's passing offense in recent years, using the most recent one as an example. You go through and you look at what J.J. McCarthy did, and obviously the stat line everybody throws out is what he did against a ranked Penn State team. 7 of 8 for 60 yards. No touchdowns, no interceptions. However, Once the postseason came around, right, in the semifinals against Alabama, he went 17 of 27 for 221 yards, 3 passing touchdowns, 0 interceptions, because Alabama's whole goal was to shut down Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards. And so there had to be an answer. Penn State wasn't able to stop Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards, so J.J. McCarthy didn't have to pass. It was a really ugly, really boring game. But in terms of winning the game for Michigan, they did what they needed to. And that's something that Notre Dame has to get to in 2025.
Let's look at the numbers, Trev. I mean, to back up your point, when you look at J.J. McCarthy and the performance he had, he didn't need to throw the ball against Washington. I mean, they ran for over 300 yards that game. It wasn't needed. He could just go out there and just kind of make a couple plays here and there, but they were just ran all over Washington. But to your point, it was not the case in the semifinal game against Alabama, because Alabama was able to shut their run game down. They ran for 130 yards on 32 carries, and 37 of those yards came on 2 carries, a scramble by J.J. McCarthy and a 21-yard run by Blake Corum. Donovan Edwards only had 11 yards on 4 carries. He had the 21-yard gain, but Corum's other 18 carries only went for 62 yards. They still needed overtime to win that game. They needed JJ to step up and make some plays in the pass game. He didn't throw for 400 yards. He only threw for 221. But he passed for 200. He went 17 of 27 for 221 yards, and he had 3 touchdowns and no picks. But even more importantly, besides just the numbers, which weren't lights out, 8.2 yards per attempt it's a good number, but it's not a lights out number. 13 yards per completion is a good number, but 8.2 and 13 in a college football playoff semifinals, a good number against a good defense. But it was the efficiency that he had, 3 touchdowns, no picks, but it was also the moments. He made those big plays in the moments. I think of him hitting Roman Wilson a couple times in some really big moments in that game. He had a couple huge throws to Colton Loveland. So you and I can agree that I'm not putting J.J. McCarthy in the same level as a Joe Burrow and Trevor Lawrence and some of these big time quarterbacks that have Mac Jones, but he made the plays that he needed to make. And he did that against Penn State 2023, but he's not doing that against Penn State 2024. This is a better version of Penn State. And when you break it down, Trev, that's where I come from. Is it's one thing to have the success you have, but it's another thing to have it in the biggest moments. And Michigan in 2023 averaged 12.3 yards per completion. But in the semifinal game against Bama, when they needed it most, they were at 13 yards per attempt or yards per completion. And that was the big key. It was happening when they needed most. And when you look at Notre Dame, that's been a big thing, is even when the numbers are good, they're not good in the big moments. And there's always a different reason why. And you say, well, Sam Hartman wasn't good enough. Well, is that really the reason? What would Sam Hartman have done with this offensive coordinator and this year's run game plus this year's pass catchers and this year's coordinator? Would he have been any better? We don't know the answer to that. Would Jack Cohn have been better in 2022? We can speculate all we want, and I think he would have been, but we don't know the answer to that, because the point is there's always been something missing from all those different teams. And recruiting, coaching, all that stuff is going to fix it, Trev, and get him to that point. So that's the reason why. We'll get it in sort of the issues that they've had. Next, we're going to get into what we need to see. So we've addressed the problem. We've talked about the problem in parts 1 and 2 of this show. But next, we're going to get into, what's going to lead to better play, what's going to lead to better performances, and going to have some fun breaking that down. But before we get there, folks, do me a favor, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, we would greatly appreciate if you would give us a 5-star review. And of course, as always, make sure you've signed up for the message board at the Champions Lounge Premium Board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. That is always the best way to support us. Even if you're not a message board person, but you want to support what we're doing, you're not someone who gets on the message board, but you're listening to our show for free every day and you appreciate that, you can still sign up for the message board that way, either as a monthly member, an annual member. You can join one of our booster clubs. If you join the booster club, you get some free merch. You get a free, if you're a Shamrock or a Blue Club member, you get a free IB Club mug, which goes only to IB Club members. If you join the Gold Club, you get a free IB Club mug and an IB Gold Club t-shirt as well. So you can check those out. But again, you don't have to be someone who's always on the message board. It's also a way to just support what we're doing at Irish Breakdown. So you can check that out at boards.irishbreakdown.com.
So, Bryan, next we're going to talk about what we have to see from this offense. And we're going to talk through, we're going to break it down level by level. And I've been seeing it in the chat. I've seen better quarterback play. I've seen better pass protection. I've seen better performance from the wide receivers. We're going to dive into all of it. But where we're going to start is kind of the forefront of the passing offense. When you think passing, you go to quarterback. Notre Dame has to have better quarterback play in 2025 to help take it to that next level, to start filling some of the holes that we talked about in part 1 and part 2, Bryan.
So what does that mean, Trev? Like, what does it mean to have better quarterback play? And here's what it doesn't mean. It doesn't mean just looking at the numbers alone. It's I mean, yes, the numbers are important, but it's, can you have those numbers in the biggest moments and on the biggest stage? And that's something that we have to see is, yes, Sam Hartman didn't always have help. But there's also times when Sam Hartman had throws he needed to be able to make in those tough moments, and he just wasn't able to do it. What's interesting is the guy that I felt in the last, since Jimmy Clausen was at Notre Dame, the quarterback who I felt had the proper demeanor to be that quarterback was arguably the least physically gifted quarterback Notre Dame has had in a long time, and that was Jack Cohn. And somebody in the chat actually said it, said Palo 27. Cohn was a gunslinger. He had confidence in his throws. 100%. He had that demeanor, which is why he had so many big moments that year. But he also lacked the physical gifts of the other elite quarterbacks. But, you know, you look at Jack Cohn and some of the throws he made against Florida State. That wasn't a good team, but those were some big moments. You know, you look at the, you know, he had his struggles against Wisconsin and Cincinnati, but then he comes off the bench against Virginia Tech and makes some big time money throws. You know, he was on fire. Like once he kind of got reinserted back into the lineup after getting benched against Virginia Tech, and the staff kind of committed more to him, because he always had that Tyler Buckner effect. And also he was getting more comfortable in the offense. He was at 10.5 against Florida State per attempt. But after that, it was 7-2, 7-2, 5-4, 5-2. And then the rest of the year, he was 9-0, 6-8, 8-9, 9-3, 6-6, 14-3, 9-9, and 7-5 in the Fiesta Bowl, in a game where he threw for 509 yards and 5 touchdowns. As he got more comfortable in the offense, his numbers went way up, and he was a lot more effective. And that's why by the end of the year, even though that helped playing some not very good teams. I mean, it was a weaker schedule, but he was lighting them up, and you saw the numbers really take a jump. But he had the demeanor. I mean, Jack Cohn from Virginia Tech on was over 70% completion percentage in all but 2 games. He was at 55.9 against Oklahoma State, and he was at 66.7 against North Carolina. Those are the numbers were there. The demeanor was there, but he didn't have the arm talent that other guys had. And then in other guys that had the arm talent, they didn't have the demeanor. Ian Book is a guy that I have said I was very hard on Ian Book during his career, and I don't regret that. But it was frustrating watching Ian Book play, because I've said this before. I've watched Ian Book on the field with other quarterbacks that were drafted higher than he was, or other guys were talented. And I kept telling people, like, Ian Book's problem is not arm strength or arm talent. Ian Book's got the arm to make any throw he needs to make in the Notre Dame offense. Ian Book's thing was up here, and that was something that kept him from being that guy. I used to joke in practices. I'd be like, this is Captain. I'd call him Captain Checkdown, and Vince would always laugh at me. Like, we're in practice, and he did like 7 straight checkdowns. I'm like, dude, this is the time to try to make that throw over the top on the post route. You're just taking checkdowns all day. And then you get the games on Saturday, and it's like, you know, that's what we would see is him being that. Now, when they would play teams that weren't very good, he would have more aggressiveness, but then he would lose it. Like I've said this, if Ian Book would have played his whole career the way he played early in 2018 when he took over for Brandon Wimbush, that was the best version we ever saw of Ian Book. Or if he would have played his whole career like he did the first half against Clemson in 2020, Ian Book would have had a much different career numbers-wise, but Notre Dame would have won some big games. And I would have loved to have seen that version of Ian Book against Clemson in 2018 that just let it fly. Ian Book, where he wasn't afraid to take that throw. And the other thing was frustrating is he would wait till the fourth quarter when they were behind to make some of those throws when he had no choice. And it's like, dude, if you would have made these, if you'd had the same aggressiveness early in the game that you had now, y'all would have won by 40. And so that was frustrating. So he didn't have sort of that willingness to just, man, let this sucker go. Let me go out there and make those plays. Now, I think part of that was on Brian Kelly. I think we saw this a lot under Brian Kelly. He kind of beat guys down of don't mess up, don't mess up, don't mess up, don't mess up, where sometimes I think they were paralyzed in those type of aspects. But, you know, we saw that throughout Ian Book's career where he'd put up these big numbers against teams that weren't any good. And whenever they played somebody good, he was awful. And that was frustrating about his career. I mean, we saw this against, you know, Syracuse. He was okay. He was good against Syracuse. They weren't great on defense. 4.7 yards per attempt and 18 against Clemson. 5.9 against Georgia in 2019, 2.9 against Michigan in 2019 in the rain. In 2020, 7.9 against Clemson, because in the second half, he was unwilling to make some of the throws he made. I mean, he was just throwing one-on-one go balls to Javon McKinley in the first half and letting Javon go make plays. And Javon did what? He went out and made some great plays. Can't make great plays if you're not getting the opportunity. Against Pitt, first half against Pitt, he's just throwing the ball up and letting us go. And guess what? Ben Skoranek rewarded him with some big-time plays. But then we wouldn't see that enough. You know, second half, Notre Dame gets a lead on Clemson, and then all of a sudden they go into a shell. I think that was as much about Brian Kelly as it was about Ian Book, to be completely honest with you. But you saw that against Clemson in this ACC title game, 7.8 yards per attempt. Against Bama in the national championship game, or semifinal, 5.9 yards per attempt. And those are the things. So in games against Alabama, the 2 against Clemson in 2020, 19 against Georgia. So that's 4 games. 19 against Michigan and 18 against Clemson. In those big games, those big moments, Ian Book had only 4 touchdown passes and averaged, I think it's somewhere around like in the 6s per attempt in those games. It's not good enough. And so so a lot of great moments, but just not good enough in those moments. He was more of a lot of arm talent, made some big time throws, could scramble around and make plays, but in the biggest moments, he wasn't willing to do what he needed to do, take the chances to help this team win. And so that was a drawback. So we've seen these little – Sam Hartman also had some of those issues. Sam also had an issue where the receiving core got depleted. It was a young group anyway. You had a receiver coach problem that created some big issues within the offense. A lot of people didn't know about at the time. Your offensive line was hit or miss on how – I mean, there was games where Sam Hartman's dropping back in shotgun, and as soon as he gets to the top of his drop, there's 2 guys in his face. And I mean, it's like, well, throw the check down. He can't. He literally didn't have time to do that, to get the ball off. That's how quickly they got to him. This year we saw it with Riley Leonard. At times it was Riley not making the right reads. At times it was he was making the right reads and they were dropping balls. At times he didn't have time to throw. There's always something. There's always something different there that you just kept saying, like, there's something missing in it each time. But at the end of the day, quarterback play has been the one consistent where it's had its moments, but they've never had a quarterback over the course of an entire season, and especially in the big games, that's been able to step up and make enough plays, right? And I'm seeing it. Book was clutching on those game-winning drives against inferior opponents who they were down against because of his mistakes. He was so clutch against Pitt. Yeah, had a great post throw to Michael Boykin. His two interceptions in Pitt territory is why they were behind. Well, it's great in that drive against Virginia Tech in 19 coming from behind. Yes, he was. But it was his 2 interceptions in the red zone that are why they were behind. And so it's like, if he would have done that, and this is my whole point, if he would have done that stuff in the first half, he wouldn't have needed that moment. But when did he ever make that come from behind drive against a Penn State, against a top team? It never happened. He gets the ball at the 48-yard line with 2 minutes left against Georgia, and they do nothing. Where's that big clutch drive then? I don't care that it happened against 7-6 Virginia Tech or 7-7 Pittsburgh. Are you doing it in the big moments? And that's what was lacking from him. It's what was lacking from Sam Hartman. It honestly was lacking at times from Jack Cohn. It was lacking from Tyler Buckner. It was lacking from Drew Pine. It was lacking from Brandon Wimbush. It was lacking from Deshaun Kaiser. It was lacking from Everett Golson. It was lacking from Tommy Reese. It was lacking from Dane Christ. All those different things. You can give me all. This is the type of loser mentality that's part of the problem. Somebody just said he threw more TDs in 19 than Tua or Herbert. Again, this is a loser mentality because you're looking at numbers. Here's what Ian Book did in that year. 5 against New Mexico. 5 touchdowns against New Mexico, who that year went 2-10. He threw 5 touchdowns against Bowling Green. That team went 3-9. That's a third of his touchdowns almost against 2 teams that combined to go 5-19. He threw 4 touchdown passes against Duke, a team that season went 5-7. He threw, let's find this one. He threw 4 touchdowns against Stanford, who went 3-9, and he threw 3 touchdown passes against Boston College, who went 6-7. So that's 10, 14, and 18, 21 of his 34 touchdown passes came in 5 games against teams with a losing record. Against Michigan and Georgia, he had 3 touchdown passes and 2 interceptions. Right? I mean, this is the thing. It's not just like I said it already. It's not about the numbers alone. It's can you do that when it matters most? And when you're 21 of your 34 touchdowns are in 5 games against teams that suck, and you had 5 more against Navy, I don't care what you threw more than Tua or whatever else. You know why Tua didn't have more touchdowns that year? Because he sat out second halves of a ton of games because he threw all his touchdown passes in the first half against good teams. That's the thing. It's can you do it in the big moments? And they have not had a quarterback that could do that in a very long time. Very long time. You can argue since Brady Quinn.
2 of that year, by the way, if you're going to throw out a stat, you got to put out the whole thing. Tua also had almost 1,000 more yards, a higher completion percentage, more yards per attempt, a better quarterback rating, and Ian Book doubled his interceptions. So if you want to if you want to talk about Tua in 2019, I mean, come on, man, come on. Look, my thing with Notre Dame quarterbacks is the saying it's a day late and a dollar short. Because for the reasons that you listed off, once they were behind, once they were
by
down,
the way, Tua only played 9 games, by the way, that year.
Oh, I did not know that. But my point is, it was always a day late and a dollar short for Notre Dame quarterbacks. It was once they were down, that's when they started airing it out. And that left a lot of frustration for me, and I'm sure a lot of other fans, because you had the ability to do it. Why did you wait until this point? And some people point to the Penn State game, but at the end of the day, even though it didn't feel like it, it was a 10-3 game. Teams go into halftime with deficits. It didn't happen for Notre Dame, but the tail end of their schedule in the regular season wasn't what it was. Now, they played some quality opponents, but it wasn't hard. I'll say that. But then once again, on the biggest stage, it reared its ugly head again. They were down 31-7 to Ohio State before it clicked, and it was, all right, we should probably start airing it out now. And then look what happened. So that's where the frustration for me is, as I'm sure it is with a lot of other people. Brian, you're nodding your head. I can guarantee you agree with that too. And that's where the quarterback play has to elevate. Because it can't be until it's either too late or the sliver of hope is about that much for you to turn into a downfield passing offense. If you have the ability to do it, take advantage of it. And that's where I think Mike Denbrock can kind of help form this team into, it doesn't have to be one or the other. It doesn't have to be, well, we're only going to run the football, or, well, we're down by 17. It's time to start airing it out. I think he's going to bring a little bit of the in-between. So that's where the quarterback play needs to elevate for me. If you have the ability to do it for 4 quarters.
I love the loser mentality of some fans. I swear. Now he didn't have the talent around him. Ian Book got to throw to, I don't know, Chase Claypool, Miles Boykin, Chris Fink, Alizé Mack, Cole Kmet, Javon McKinley, Ben Skoranek, who won a Super Bowl. I mean, he had, poor old Ian Book didn't have anybody to throw to. Like but here's the thing. I've said this, it's not even just about Ian Book. I think a big reason why he had that mentality is because of Brian Kelly. And part of the reason that I think Ian Book was so good letting those balls go in the fourth quarter of games or against teams that weren't very good is because they had no choice but to let him throw. So again, this is as much about Brian Kelly as it is about Ian Book. But you can't sit there and talk about, well, it's not his fault. That's my point. It's all excuses. We're going to get to receiver play in a minute. We're going to get to the O-line in a minute. But if you think Ian Book's play was good enough to win a championship, then you don't know what it takes to win a championship at Notre Dame. It's okay to admit that. You can appreciate the kid and love how hard he played and think he was a great kid and all this other kind of stuff and sit there and say, when I watched the 2018 playoffs and it was Trevor and it was Tua and it was Kyler Murray and Ian Book, one of those didn't look like the others. It's okay to say that. And when you've got a second-round draft pick at receiver and a third-round draft pick at receiver and a tight end that got drafted and a slot receiver that played in the NFL, oh, and by the way, you've got Dexter Williams at running back out of the backfield, and you've got the line they had, and you're blaming the lack of talent on him, you're buying into the BS excuses that made Brian Kelly so famous. It's always making excuses. Here's the deal. The talent does need to get better around the quarterback. But you know what else needs to happen? The quarterback play has to be better. And we should all be able to admit that. No quarterback at Notre Dame played championship caliber since 1988. You know how I know that? Because they haven't won a championship since 1988, right? And so, I did it. So you could look at Riley Leonard, who we've defended a lot. But what are we saying? He showed it in the second half, but if he would have showed it in the first half, they would not have needed the second half comeback. Or in the case of Ohio State, maybe they would have been in better position to go play. Because imagine if the Notre Dame defense, for all its struggles, had an offense that was keeping up with Ohio State early on, and they had time to adjust, and they didn't go 3 and out back to back to back. And they had time to kind of get on the board. And it's been the case forever. And when you are talking about a guy that went 5-5 against ranked opponents and lifting him up as if he was some phenomenal all-time great, you're accepting mediocrity. And that's why Notre Dame hasn't won in a long time. What Riley Leonard did was awesome. Wasn't good enough because they fell short. What Sam Hartman did wasn't good enough. What Jack Cohn did wasn't good enough. What Riley Leonard did, Ian Book did wasn't good enough. Right? I mean, those are the different things. Is it's got to get better. We should all be able to acknowledge that there's been some good quarterbacks. They didn't win whatever 30-something games at Notre Dame under Ian Book in spite of Ian Book. We're not arguing that. But we are arguing very clearly that Ian Book wasn't a championship caliber quarterback. And that shouldn't be up for debate. Now, to get to that point, Trevor, they do have to get better. So we've already kind of thrown that aside. We don't have to deal with that mess anymore. We can now talk about what needs to happen moving forward. And the reality is quarterback play has got to get better. Yes, it'd be nice to have a guy that can run and be dynamic like Riley, but it has to be more effective throwing the football. That's the thing about J.J. McCarthy. If you're going to have the lack of numbers that he had, you better be efficient. You better make some big plays, and you better be able to make plays with your legs. Because there were some games where you look at the numbers and you're like, well, JJ didn't exactly put up a bunch of passing numbers in that, I mean, he was good, but he wasn't like, lighting the world on fire or anything, in that moment. I mean, yeah, he did this and he did that, but the throwing the football, he didn't exactly blow me away. And you're like, yeah, but look at some of the plays he made with his legs in those games, and that's what he kind of brought to the table is he didn't make a ton of plays with his legs, but he made clutch plays with his legs. On top of throwing for 221 yards against Alabama, he also rushed for 25 yards on 3 carries. On top of the 140 yards he had passing against Washington, he also ran for 31. So if you're going to have a guy that's not, as dynamic as these other quarterbacks, he better have some mobility. But I'm willing to sacrifice that for a guy that can get the ball to the more dynamic players more consistently more effectively and in better position. And that's where I want to see this next level. If Kenny Minchie or CJ Carr are good runners and they can scramble or whatever, if Steve Angeli can run, fine. But at the end of the day, the passing has got to get a lot better. Decision-making has got to get better, pre and post-snap. The consistency has to be there more. Every quarterback's going to have an off day. Every single one has an off day. But you've got to be more consistently effective. It can't be like the roller coaster that we've been on for so many years. You have to be more consistent. And you have to be more willing to attack all parts of the field. I think that more than anything has been one of the biggest issues for Notre Dame quarterbacks, Trevor, is an unwillingness or inability, whether it's scheme related, whether it's coaching related, whether it's up to them. It's not so much about hammering the quarterbacks as it's hammering the entire operation that leads to a lack of just really being aggressive, attacking down the field. That doesn't mean go routes and post routes only. That could mean throwing some back shoulders, throwing some comeback routes, low and away on the sideline where, yeah, he's not wide open, but that guy coming out of the break, you throw that ball about 3 feet off the ground down towards the sideline, he goes down and catches it, or it's an incomplete pass. It's those type of things also. It's being able to hit that curl route between, 4 feet of defenders and not always just, I'm not going to make that throw. Knowing when to make that throw, knowing when not to make that throw. But just being willing to attack all levels of the defense and having a little bit more confidence in their ability, but then also their playmakers' ability. That was the biggest thing that we saw from Riley Leonard in the last 2 games, is his willingness to just throw the ball, not throw it up like he's just like, blindly throwing the ball in the air. But hey, look, man, Jaden Greathouse got a one-on-one. I'm going to give him a chance to go make a play. Chris Mitchell's got a one-on-one. I'm going to give him a chance to go make a play. Bo Collins is one-on-one on this RPO. I'm going to go give him a chance to go make a play. And you know what they did for him in every instance in the playoffs? Every single time in the college football playoff, when Riley Leonard threw the ball up to his receivers or tight end and said, I need you to go make a play, I believe almost every time they made the play. But there was an unwillingness to make those same exact throws throughout the regular season. And that's been true a long time. It's like some of the great throws that Ian Book made. I've talked about this. That great throw against Pitt to Miles Boykin for a touchdown. Great throw. Big moment. You're down. Your undefeated season's about to go down. If he makes that same throw against Clemson in the first quarter, Notre Dame's up 7-0. I mean, that's the thing. It's you've got to be willing to make some more of those throws. And Notre Dame's quarterbacks have not been willing to do that, where Will Howard was more willing to do that. Okay, that's not fair. Riley Leonard doesn't have Jeremiah Smith. Granted, but Riley did that same thing in that game, and Jaden Greathouse did make those plays also. And Bo Collins did, and Jordan Faison did, and Chris Mitchell did in his opportunities, and Bo did as well in the playoff. He didn't have a lot of opportunities, but he caught every ball they threw at him, including the touchdown was not an easy catch because the guy was in decent coverage, and Riley put it right on him, right on his gut, and Bo made the play. That was a big moment, and Bo made the play. So that's the thing, is you've got to be more willing to say, I got to let my playmakers go eat. And when Ian Book was at his best, it's when he was willing, like the Stanford game in 2018, when he's just throwing back shoulders all day to Miles Boykin and hit him on over routes. You're just like, dude, that's a thing of beauty. And that's the thing, is if we could have got that more often, maybe we're having a different conversation about Ian Book. And same thing with every other quarterback. So that's where I want to see from this is you've got to get quarterbacks that not only have the talent, but the willingness to attack the entire field, no matter the opponent.
Yeah, it's going to be a big step in their evolution. It's going to be the willingness to trust your guys and take the shot one-on-one. And that's what we saw in the postseason from this offense, which leaves a lot of room for hoping what this room is going to look like with a guy in Riley Leonard whose strength wasn't passing the football. It's okay to say that. Wasn't bad at it, but he's a guy who was a dynamic runner. To me, I'm always going to use the Georgia game as a little bit of a reference, is the difference that you're going to see from Notre Dame from 24 to 25. When they're shutting down Jeremiah Love, when outside of 2 carries, they're shutting down Jadarian Price, you're not going to have a quarterback under center in 2025, regardless of it being Angeli, Carr, or Minchie, who can rush for 80 yards on 11, 14 carries, whatever he had. So the difference is going to be willingness to take your shots, because I think the Notre Dame receiving core showed in the returners that are coming back, prove their worth in the postseason. Jordan Faison on that deep route against Indiana. Jaden Greathouse against Penn State and against Ohio State. Eli Raridan in moments against Ohio State. And then obviously you see what Malachi Fields did at Virginia over his tenure while he was there. He is a proven guy coming in, great catch radius. Hey, if you throw the football in my direction more times than not, I'm coming down with it. So that's what I want to see. But diving into the wide receiver play, because
just real quick. So we will get into more specifics of, somebody asked a great question. Texas Mac asked, is that QB at Notre Dame now? We'll get to that. We're talking more big picture right this second, but I promise you we're going to get to that because that's part of our reason for excitement. But continue, Trev.
Another facet of Notre Dame's pass offense improving is not just with the quarterback that we had alluded to. The other part is who's on the receiving end of these passes, and that's the wide receivers. Wide receiver play is going to be a big piece in the passing offense elevating. They have the talent to do it. They have the potential to do it. But Bryan, what we need to see from wide receiver play is going to have to elevate from where it was at in 24 and 23. Bottom line.
Receiver is a lot like quarterback. There's been talent there, but it's inconsistent talent. Some years it's there, some years it's not. If you wanted to get into a debate about Ian Book not having the proper talent, you can make that case in certain years. You can't make that case in others, but it shouldn't be that way. It should be consistent from year to year. 2018, he's got Miles Boykin, Chase Claypool, Chris Fink, Alize Mack, Cole Kmet, all to throw to, plus Dexter Williams and Tony Jones out of the backfield. All guys have played in the NFL. They had Kevin Austin on that team. Never used him. 2019, he has Chase Claypool, Cole Kmet, Chris Fink, Javon McKinley, Braden Lindsey, who they didn't use until the last 3 games of the year, and he balled. That's not on Ian Book. That's on the coaching staff not putting him in the game and giving him more of those opportunities. And then in 2020, you had a good receiving core, but not a great one. But you had Javon McKinley, Michael Mayer, Ben Skoranek, Avery Davis, Kyron out of the backfield, Tommy Trumbull. Braden Lindsey was on that team as well, although he was banged up all year. But you had weapons in different years, but it wasn't consistent. And then you come out in 2021, and you've got Michael Mayer and Kevin Austin, but then there's a bit of a drop-off after that because you had a lot of guys injured. You had Lorenzo Styles stepped up at times that year. He had his moments, but then you come out in 2022, and you've got Michael Mayer, and you've got Jaden Thomas. Lorenzo Styles is a sophomore. He doesn't really step up big. Braden Lindsey actually had a pretty good year, but they just never threw to him. I mean, Braden Lindsey should have had 800-900 yards that year on about 30 catches. If you look at how many times he was open that year in those type of moments. And then, but it was just, there was no depth. Nobody was really that go-to guy outside of Michael Mayer. And so there was definitely years that you could look at and say the talent wasn't good enough. Last year, Notre Dame's with Sam Hartman's trying to rely on an offense that's, yes, you've got Michael Mayer, but you've got a converted running back in the slot who you're trying to turn into a go-to guy as opposed to being a complementary weapon. And then you've got a sophomore who you needed to step up. He didn't. Your receivers coach didn't put him in position at times, didn't work with him at times. You're then relying on a bunch of freshmen to step up. One of your veterans that you're counting on, Jaden Thomas, gets hurt early. Deion Colsey gets hurt early. But your recruiting issues have kept it to where you've had good receiver talent, but not really good receiver talent consistently enough. Javon McKinley, Ben Skoranek, Avery Davis is a good receiving core. That's not an elite receiving core. That's not even a really good receiving core. Like Javon McKinley was a really good football player his last year, but he needs to be your number 2, not your number 1. You need to complement him with like Miles had Chase as a compliment. He had Chris Fink as a compliment. Ben Skoranek is a quality football player. He should have been your number 3, not your number 2, or even your number 4, not your number 2. And that's sort of the issue they've run. And then in 2023 was probably the worst, the worst group of pass catchers they've had from the standpoint of where guys were in their transitions to a position or in their youth. And Sam Hartman, that's what Sam Hartman was working with. Receiving core this year was good. I don't think it was necessarily fit this quarterback. I think a guy like Chris Mitchell would have had a much different year if he had Sam Hartman throwing to him than Riley Leonard. It's not good or bad. It's just he came in the wrong year. He would have been much better served to be at Notre Dame in 2023. That's part of it. But Bo Collins is a good football player. He shouldn't be your number 1. And that's just the reality of it. And so the talent at receiver has not been consistently good enough to be a championship team. It's getting there. It's been better at times than what the production has shown, but it has not been like I've said this about 2023. I felt that in 2023, trying to think how to say this, Trev. Kind of looking at, I'm actually let me deal with this. We don't need this stuff. We don't need this stuff in the chat. Sorry, guys. We don't need that kind of going at each other. Here's kind of where I'm going with this, Trev. When you look at the receiver talent the last couple of years, 2023, I argued that the receivers were not as bad as people make them out. People made them out to be. They were open more than they should have been. Than people thought they were. There was a whole lot of different things. It was more of a standpoint of they were not getting the ball in time. They weren't the top read. The O-line wasn't there. But it was never if the quarterback would throw the ball, this is an elite group, right? That's what I'm saying. But it still wasn't good enough.
When I go back through and I look at the 2023 receiving core, the thing that I think of the most is what would it look like if an entire receiving room was just filled with raw guys? And that's what it was. Raw guys who were not pointed in the right direction from a coaching standpoint. And you talk about timing and things just didn't align. First-year offensive coordinator in Jared Parker, and not first-time offensive coordinator at Notre Dame. Was that his first ever, or was he a offensive coordinator at a previous destination?
He was the OC at West Virginia, but he wasn't the primary play caller.
Okay.
The head coach, Neil Brown, had a big role in what they were doing.
Gotcha. So, albeit, give or take, first-year offensive coordinator in Jared Parker, and regardless of his previous tenure, it was his first time at Notre Dame as the offensive coordinator. Mm-hmm. You had a transfer portal quarterback, and you had a lot of young wide receivers because a lot of your veterans were dealing with injury issues. And so for me, I look at it, and the wide receiver development, as far as who the coach was at the time in the room, was not doing his due diligence, getting those young guys ready. That was the difference this year.
Like just an example, they would work on stuff. And you want to talk about part of the reason why they struggled? I was told this during the season and had it confirmed afterwards. But they would practice all week. Okay, we want Tobias running this route, or we want Greathouse running this route. And they would practice it all week, and Sam would make that throw 5-6 times to Tobias, or 5-6 times to Jaden Greathouse, or Jaden Thomas, or whoever. And then they'd get in the game, and Chancey Stuckey would put somebody different in the game than what Jared Parker and the team had game planned for. So, for example, this is what I was told. The first drive against Louisville, the go route that they threw to Rico Flores, all week they practiced that, I was told, to Tobias, and they were hitting it all week. 6'4" guy against a 5'11" corner, taller, not a 5'6". I think it was it Brownlee that made the pick, but their two corners that year were taller guys. And instead of putting your 6'4" guy in the game, you put your 6-foot guy in the game, Rico Flores, who wasn't even supposed to be there and is not a one-on-one player. And then lo and behold, it gets picked. A shocker. So that stuff was going on also. And that's a big reason why that dude got fired 5 minutes after the season was over with, because that stuff was going on. That was an anomaly. That was not, to your point, that was not the case this year. They had a guy that was much better about making sure that the right people were in the games at the right times. So that's part of that as well. That was an anomaly. You can't blame that on a lot of years, but you can blame it last year. But that's what's so frustrating when you look at the missed opportunities. There's always something with this pass game that keeps them in the fold. But that, so I just want to make that clear, Trev. Keep going with where you're going.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I mean, look, to me, what I need to see overall from this receiving core is I need to see them, one, play at a more consistent level. If they can just replicate what they did in the postseason for an entire season, it's good by me. It means they're moving in the right direction. And also continuing to utilize people in the right spots. Right. Sometimes I think they were a little bit hindered. We're going to talk more about the diversity of the room later on in the show. But I do believe that they're getting better at diversifying what they do on offense, but continuing to do that. Those are things that I need to see. And then just continuity and consistency around urgency coming off the line of scrimmage. Because there were some games where it was like, man, these guys don't even look like they want to fire off the line of scrimmage. They don't know. They don't want to run this route because they don't know if the ball is coming to them. And that's it's a life of a wide receiver. It's tough. It's a really hard ask to run everything at 110% when there's a good chance you're not getting the football. But that level of consistency has to raise. But for me, overall, Bryan, the 2023 room, when I look at it, it's just a room full of raw guys. Like, what would it look like if a football team had 5 guys that were just all raw? And that's what it was for me last year.
In 2024 or 2023?
23, sorry. When I'm
I'm with you. Some people, like when I think last year, I'm still thinking of 23 like you are. But some people, mean it to be this past year. Agree. And there were injuries. Jaden Thomas going down early in the season hurt them a lot. And he played, but he was never the same. Jaden Greathouse dealt with a hamstring injury that slowed him down the middle of the season. I mean, there's other different reasons for it. And then this year, you had guys in positions where, Bo Cons is a good football player. He helped his football team, but he should not be your number one. You didn't have that type of number one, take a game over guy like Penn State had in Tyler Warren, or like Ohio State had in Jonathan Smith or Emeka Egbuka. This is not that kind of guy. If you're going to not have that kind of guy, you need 4 or 5 guys that are really good. I don't know they always had that this year. Mitchell Evans wasn't the same he was last year. He had some games here and there, but overall he wasn't. And they just didn't have that type of guy. And you're going to need that type of guy to win the championship because you're going to need that kind of guy. But here's the thing. But they did have a guy step up in the championship game, though, and be that kind of guy, and that was Jaden Greathouse. I mean, Jaden Greathouse was like, as soon as you start throwing the ball, it's like anything you can do, I can do better. Yeah, you made your one big play, but I made 3. I'm the guy that made Caleb Downs look like a fool in space and get our first touchdown. I'm the guy that went against, was it Jordan Hancock, and just he's holding my one arm. I'm still going to catch that touchdown with my other one. I think it's 3 big plays in that game. I think he beat 3 different people because didn't he beat Cody Simon on the other one, the linebacker, on the deep drag on 3rd and 9?
Yes.
So he beats Caleb Downs and Jermaine Matthews on one play, beats for a touchdown, beats Jordan Hancock for a touchdown on another one, and beats Cody Simon on an over route on the 3rd and 9 and another one. So it wasn't like he just had a good matchup that game. He was beating anybody they put against him. Well, that's what you need more of. That performance was there. But in the first half, the quarterback wasn't making the proper reads to get the ball where it needed to get to. So that's why or and we'll get into the next thing, your pass pro's got to be better. And I think that's a big part of it too, Trevor. There's been years the receiving corps has been good enough. I mean, I think the 2015 receiving corps was good enough. It's pretty good. The 2018 receiving corps was good enough, in my opinion, to compete for a championship. I don't care what anybody says. But in the biggest game, the quarterback wasn't good enough. Just wasn't. In 19 against Georgia, Cole Kmet was eating Georgia alive. Whenever they actually threw the ball to Chase Claypool, he made plays. They gave Lawrence Keys one chance to make a play in that game. And guess what? He made it on a one-on-one go route. You just weren't willing to throw the ball when you needed to in that moment. And other times, like last year and this year, there were times where the quarterback was making the throws he needed to make, and the receivers stepped up and made plays. I mean, so it's always something. And then there's other games where I felt like, the quarterback and receivers were playing well, but the O-line wasn't playing well enough and wasn't giving them good time. So the O-line too, especially recently, the last 2 years, especially under Joe Rudolph, I thought Joe Rudolph did a great job of making improvements from how they went about handling the run game from last year to this year. They were a catch team last year. They weren't a push team last year. They weren't a physical team. They didn't drive their feet through contact last year. They had a lot of MAs in the run game last year. This year, despite being young, much more physical, much better leg drive, use their hands better, can still need some work. But I think that's as much about having a bunch of young guys as it is about what's being taught. But, much better push, play with much better angles, got to the second level a lot better than they did last year. So we saw a lot of improvement in that regard. Now going into year 3, what Coach Rudolph needs to work on improving is now get better with the pass game stuff. Be better against the twists and slants. Be better in one-on-one. Teach them to better, play with better angles on the edge. They get beat off the edge with speed rushes on plays where you're just like, that shouldn't have been a win. Like, that guy did not come off the way that he needed to get a win on that. Like, that was just bad technique. Well, it's understandable when you got a true freshman at left tackle and a redshirt sophomore in the first year to start at right tackle. That's going to happen. You can live with that, but can't happen in year 2. That's the thing moving forward. Those things got to get fixed. Okay, I understand why you maybe had some issues this year with some of the twist stuff. If we're going to make excuses, and excuses aren't always bad because sometimes they're legitimate. I mean, it's like, yeah, it's an excuse, but it's also the reality. You can say, well, you're making excuses that they had a bunch of freshmen on the receiver last year. Well, yeah, it's an excuse, but it's also true. They did have a bunch of right. Yeah. The offensive line had a bunch of different lineups throughout the year. You know, what you thought you were going to have coming into fall camp gets nixed within a week. You get a new starter at left guard, new starter at left tackle. You're dealing with a brand new starter at right tackle. Then by game 3, your center's out, your right guard's out. And then your right guard comes back in a few games. He replaces your left guard. That's a new lineup. You get into the semifinals. You lose Anthony Knapp and Rocco Spindler within like a quarter of each other. And you're getting your, 6th or 7th new different lineup in the championship game. All right. I understand that. Well, Ohio State also went through that last year, and their offensive line played better against Notre Dame than, but they weren't going against Jack Sawyer and JTT. And so there's all things that you can point to. It is what it is. But now in year 3, Emil's going into his second year as a starter. Billy's going into a senior year. Anthony's going to be a sophomore with a whole year starting under his belt. Anthony Napple. Jagasaul's going into his junior year. He's got more experience now. There's no reasons now to still be struggling with those things in year 3. And so if he can continue enhancing what we're seeing from the run game, so like you made that growth from year 1 to year 2, there's some things they can still clean up in the run game. We talked about that in the first 2 rounds. They stopped moving their feet against Georgia and Indiana. They had a tough time handling some of the stuff they were throwing at them. Yeah, you need to get better there. But just continue just normal, steady growth in that run game stuff, which I thought, again, made huge improvements in year 2. And now it's like but now it's time you got to get the pass pro more consistent. Because in today's era, teams they're bringing more pressures. They know they don't have the time to just win on the outside as much anymore. They know they've got to bring line games. They're doing things to try to shut down your run game. That then, if it's a pass, they kind of run through the run gap blitz into the backfield. There's all those type of things that went on that you got to just clean up now. There wasn't a whole lot of plays this year where you're just like, that guy's not good enough. Like outside of what Anthony Nat or Emil Wagner against Abdul Carter, it's probably the only game where you're like, that guy's not good enough to stop that guy. But you know who else has that problem? Yeah, that's another one, right? There weren't a lot of those. There weren't a lot of those. Those things need to obviously continue to recruit elite players, but that's rarely going to happen. It's more about you got to play better. You've got to play with better technique. You've got to handle this. You got to handle that. So it's all coachable. It's all correctable. That's encouraging. And you know who else had a hard time blocking Abdul Carter? Like everybody in the country not named. I mean, and it was, well, Donovan Jackson. Donovan Jackson gave up like 4 or 5 pressures against Abdul Carter. So his version of slowing him down looks a whole lot different than what we're envisioning as slowing someone down. That guys like that are going to get theirs. That's not who you evaluate. Well, Emil Wagner should get benched because look what Abdul Carter did to him. Okay, I watched Abdul Carter do that to everyone. You know what I mean? Like, let's not use our agenda to make a point. You know, let's not look for facts to support our narrative that aren't necessarily fair or there. You know
because in the same light, I watched Emil Wagner throw Jack Sawyer with one arm.
Right.
I mean,
right. Now, should there be a battle at right tackle? There should be a battle at every position. When you recruit the O-line the way Notre Dame does, you should always have to earn your keep. But there's this, like, the point is the talent won't be the issue. Experience was a problem this year. Cohesiveness was a problem this year. And those aren't necessarily things that Joe Rudolph could do anything about. He can't all of a sudden make Anthony Knapp a junior. He can't all of a sudden make Emil Wagner a third-year starter. You're working with what you're working with. In some areas, they made great growth. Now they need to make a great growth in other areas in year 3. And if they can do that in the pass game, that's going to be huge because it's going to be even more important next year, Trevor, because they don't have Riley Leonard to bail them out. People have talked about, well, they only gave up X number of sacks this year. Put any other quarterback on your roster at quarterback, and Notre Dame is in the bottom 50 of sacks allowed this past season, if not the bottom 30, because Riley Leonard saved you from a lot of sacks this year. That doesn't mean it's going to be the case next year, but you're going to have to make sure, because I don't care if it's Steve Angeli, I don't care if it's Kenny Minchie, I don't care if it's CJ Carr, you are going to have a quarterback that's not able to avoid pressure with his legs and his size and strength next year the way you did this year, which means you've got to be the ones that just give him more time. That's going to be a big key for next season. And if Joe Rudolph can make the same growth in pass pro from 24 to 25 that he made from the run game from 22 to 23, now I know the run game numbers were still good in 2023, but we talked about this. It was a lot of just, number one, you had really good talent, but there was also the same level of inconsistency. You had a bunch of yards against bad teams. You know, you ran for over 600 yards in your last two games against not very good teams. You ran for 236 against Central Michigan, 221 against Tennessee State. You had a good game against Ohio State, but you couldn't run on Duke outside of one carry by Audric. You couldn't run on USC. You got dominated by Louisville. You ran on Clemson in the first half, didn't do jack against them in the second half, right? I mean, it was the consistency wasn't there in 2023. And you made improvement to where this year they were far more explosive and far more consistent with their running game this season than they were last season. Obviously, the last two games of the postseason weren't great, but some of that was those good teams are going to say, we're not going to let you run the ball, and guess what? You're going to be able to run the ball. That's why you need to be able to hurt them with the pass game. And for half of those games, they couldn't. So if the pass pro can have that same kind of growth, then I think this offense will have a great shot at being really good next year. But that's a big key. That's a really big key for this, Trev.
I'm going to sound like a broken record, but for me, it's level of consistency, because over Joe Rudolph's 2 years as Notre Dame's offensive line coach, we've seen moments against Ohio State, honestly, in 23 and 24, pass pro outside of a couple plays is pretty decent, if I'm being honest. But
first half, it was
yeah,
but second half, it was fine.
And for me, it just can't have the in-between. You can't have moments where it's like, yo, maybe they're taking the step. And then you have other moments where it's, okay,
like Louisville, when they were getting Riley Leonard hit on quick game.
Man.
Like, do you know how inexcusable it is for your quarterback to get hit that much in quick game? But that's what we saw this year against Louisville.
Mm-hmm.
Bro, he was getting hit by multiple guys in quick game. Like catch, plant, throw. I mean, that should never happen. Should never happen.
Ever.
And that happened multiple times this season with this offensive line, Trev.
Ever.
And they still played for the championship. Like, that's what should get you excited about next year. Is like, guys, this is all correctable. Those things weren't happening because they lacked talent. They were happening because they were making mistakes. They weren't prepared, for whatever reason. And this is even to blame Joe Rudolph, as we just said. There's a lot of reasons why continuity is so important on the O-line. So important. And what Ohio State did this year with their offensive line is rare. You can't assume you're going to be able to repeat that, where they just had the multiple injuries and were able to overcome them. And you're moving Donovan Jackson from guard to tackle and, those type of things. But it happened for them. It didn't happen for Notre Dame. Partly because Notre Dame was putting a lot younger guys on the field in some of those instances, but not always. I mean, the first two injuries they had, they put two seniors on the field who started the year before. Can't really blame that on that. You just got to do a better job. You got to do a better job with your offensive line. That's the task for Coach Rudolph. Great job in the run game. Now get the pass blocking going next year. And there are also some schematic things as we slide into this last topic, Trev. There's definitely some schematic things they need to do better pass game wise, but a big thing is they've got to really think through their pass pro philosophy, scheme wise, how they set checks, all of it, because there were some things that you could tell that teams were finding holes in their scheme that they could identify. This is what they're doing. So there's some sort of tell. I don't know what it is, but there's some sort of tell in what Notre Dame was doing this year that was allowing teams to kind of have a sense of where the weak spot was going to be in their protection. or they knew if they did this, they could get Notre Dame to do this, and that would open up, which again is still finding the weak spot in what they're doing. And so schematically, that's one thing they're going to definitely have to look at. Yes, Joe Rudolph needs to do a better job of teaching certain things, but there's some things they're going to have to think through schematically this offseason and maybe sit down with some other teams that are doing some things a little bit different and think through, okay, what are we doing in pass pro that is going to allow us to be more effective more consistently? And then the other one is going to be looking at it from the standpoint of what are we doing it could be something as simple as, hey, our slide protection works, but we have a habit of sliding it this way when we should slide it that way at times. Or our mic protection works, but we're kind of old school with it. We're kind of sliding in here, but a lot more teams are bringing their pressures from here. In the past, maybe you're facing a lot of teams that bring that boundary pressure, and so you set your mic protection to go that way, or teams are, or now you say maybe we'll set to the field, or vice versa. You just have to be more prepared to handle those things. And so sometimes it's not so much that your scheme is wrong. Sometimes it's just you're not setting it correctly against certain looks, or you're not complementing certain pass concepts with the proper protection scheme, and you've just got to make some adjustments there. In some other instances, it's simply just looking at it from the standpoint of, hey, you got to do a better job of teaching guys how to play, and that's going to be part of it as well. Real quick, I saw somebody ask, I was meant to explain this in the beginning of the show, but I wore my Gap closer shirt today, and my point was going to be closing the gap is not just about recruiting at this point in time for Notre Dame. It's also about how you play. And one of the ways you need to close the gap is obviously throwing the football. So, Matt S., thank you for asking that. I was going to bring that up in the intro, but I got distracted and completely forgot. So that's my bad. But that's why the gap closers, because this is an area where Notre Dame needs to close the gap in regard to some of those top teams. So now, when you look at sort of what Notre Dame needs to do scheme-wise also, I do think there needs to be some continued adjustments in the pass game from how they go about attacking teams, not even just looking at the personnel. But one thing we talked about last week, and we won't rehash it now, is Mike Denbrock did some things this year. Like he loves the slot fade. We did a breakdown of that before the season, where we looked at some LSU film and talked about the slot fade. We talked about some concepts that they like to run, and he saw those. The slot fade worked this year, and I don't think Riley felt good about it early, but he got more and more comfortable with it later in the year. We saw them run a touchdown against Florida State with a slot fade. They got a slot fade touchdown against USC. They had a slot fade touchdown against Penn State, had a 3rd and 7, 3rd and 9 conversion against Penn State off of a slot fade. You hit a touchdown pass against Ohio State on the slot fade also. So we saw more of that. We'll see more of that next year. I think next year we'll see it out of even different looks, using a lot differently. They were a little bit handicapped on how they could use it this year just because of pass pro and your quarterback and some different factors. But we saw, he hit Jaden Greathouse on the slot fade against Georgia Tech. So we saw it more and more, and I think next year we'll see it even more than we saw it this year. But there was other concepts that I know Mike Denbrock likes to throw that we didn't see as much of this year. He likes to throw posts. He likes to throw a post or two a game. We didn't see that as much this year. They had some issues with it early on. Obviously, Riley Leonard threw a pick on a post route against Northern Illinois that got picked off. I just don't think Riley felt really great about throwing post routes, so we didn't see a lot of them. He threw the bad post route against Georgia Tech for a pick. I don't think he read post routes really well. And I understand that. Some quarterbacks just don't read post routes super great. They're not super comfortable with it. They don't see that backside, or they just kind of lock. They get in their head where they make the decision too quick because they feel like it's a deeper throw. So I've got to get to the top and I got to let her go. So I make my decision too early. We saw him. I don't think he was comfortable with it. And so he definitely, I don't know that we ever saw him throw an inside post. And that was a part of what Mike Denbrock likes to do. Mike Denbrock also in the past has really liked to work the seams, vertical seams. He did that a lot at Cincinnati. He did that a lot at LSU. We didn't see him do that a lot this year. That's because Mike Denbrock's a good coach who doesn't just force feed his offense down to personnel that doesn't fit it. I don't think Riley was real comfortable throwing that route. I don't know that he had receivers that outside of maybe Greathouse that were really good at that type of concept of finding that open zone. So I think we'll see more of that. There's certain he likes to run in the past would like to run slip screens. That's not really a screen you're going to run with this 2024 Notre Dame team. And well, hold on a second. You got Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price and Aeneas Williams. It's not that. It's when teams are playing to stop the run so much and they have that many guys in the box and playing the alleys, you don't have the lanes to create a slip screen. A slip screen is great against teams that want to run cover 4, cover 2, have that extra safety back. It's more of they're defending the pass more. Let's hit that slip screen. So the pass rush comes up, they're dropping 7. Then we find that space in between to kind of hit that slip screen, hit that little angle screen to the back. Those things weren't as effective this year because teams put so many resources close to the line of scrimmage. It would have been much more difficult to get that type of concept in. Next year, if Notre Dame is better throwing the ball and they're more balanced, then I think you're going to see some opportunities. It's the same reason why we didn't see them throw a lot of swing screens. When teams are that tight to the line of scrimmage and they're single high a lot post-snap, you have a harder time getting the numbers you need to be effective with some of the swing screens and the slide screens. As you get more effective with a more balanced pass attack, those things open up more. The tight end under screen off read zone, we didn't see that a ton this year. He ran that a lot at Cincinnati, ran it a lot at LSU. It didn't fit with this offense very well because of how teams defended this offense, because they weren't a team that were going to scare anybody throwing the ball down the field. And so there was a lot of concepts like that, Trev, that we'll see more of that'll help. But then there's some other things that we talk about too that needs to be happening with how you use your personnel. And I know you had a really good first couple points that you want to see some changes that fit the personnel, but also that you just see a lot of teams that are really good throwing the football use these things and incorporate it into their offense.
Yeah, the first one for me is, to your point, utilizing your personnel differently. Now, one of the benefits that Notre Dame has, and we're going to talk more about this in our reasons for optimism, but they have a diversified receiving room. And when Mike Denbrock has been at his best, we draw a lot of analogies back to what he did at LSU. Now, let's call a spade here. They don't have a Malik Neighbors. They don't have a Keyshawn Booty on their team. They don't have a Brian Thomas on their team. But what Mike
Denbrock
don't have
Jaden Daniels on their team either.
Right,
yeah.
right,
yeah.
right. Yeah,
that helps.
Yeah,
that helps.
Absolutely. But
do they have some Alec Pierces and some Trey Thomases and some Tyler Whites and a Desmond Ritter, Josh Wiley? That I think they have on their roster.
Yes. And when you have personnel groupings like that, you need to be able to diversify how you use them. And that's going to be one of the things that I'm going to be looking for. And what I hope to see in this upcoming season is, yes, you brought Malachi Fields in to be your boundary receiver. Doesn't mean you just have to stick him in the boundary every offensive snap. Move him around. Yes, we've seen Jordan Faison be a really effective slot receiver for Notre Dame. He's able to make plays after the catch on quick little drag routes, some slant routes, but you don't just have to keep him in the slot and leave him there. So for me, I would like to see their personnel used differently. And one of the ways that you get there is I would like to see them use motion differently. That's my second point. Now, in 2024, a lot of their motions were quick little zip motions, or it would be just,
yeah.
And then towards the end of the season, especially in the postseason, it was just motioning the tight end to the side where they had to set the protection. That was a lot of the motion that we saw. So for me, I would like to see more things.
Except, look at the touchdown pass against Penn State. Yep. That motion, that quick zip motion, because you had done that so much the week before against Georgia and thrown Jordan Faison on the ball, they were really keen on Jordan Faison on that play, which is partly what opened up that. Trey, it was crazy how much just that little zip motion got Notre Dame receivers open all the time this season. And they didn't hit a lot of them for different reasons, but they still hit a lot of. I mean, there's too much they missed. I think of the play against Purdue where Bo Collins is wide open for a touchdown, and Anthony Knapp gets launched into Riley Leonard, so the ball just kind of goes flying. There was a lot of those instances this year where just that little zip motion, and that was it. imagine if they incorporated, to your point, some of the things that you're about to talk about, because that little zip motion was really effective. But just moving the tight end around to get him into position to block, that was a necessity of this running team. You're going to have to make some adjustments next year with your run game to where you don't have to manipulate your tight end with the motion. You manipulate him post-snap so you can better utilize your receivers to get movement, or your running backs in motion to get movement, to create some more opportunities and to get the defense adjusting in different ways than what we saw this year.
Motioning into the stack was also really effective for them. I mean, just running at a stack in general. I mean, you go back through and you think, I think one of Jaden Harrison's deep catches down the field was out of stack. Jaden Greathouse, when he motioned into a stack, that was his touchdown against Penn State. Louisville was
great. It was the drive where Louisville had made it a one-score game, 24-17. They motioned to a stack, and that's how they just turned Jaden Harrison loose. They didn't cover him because that stack forced they got to communicate right when the ball is being snapped, and they communicated poorly. And Jaden Harrison just runs a slot fade wide open for the catch. To your point, it was the Louisville game, and that's a big game and a big moment. To your point, Trev.
Oh yeah. Well, now and plus you are now starting to have the personnel to be able to do more of those things. You bring in a Malachi Fields, Jaden Greathouse builds on his performance, but those are some of the things I want to see schematically. The last one for me, Bryan, is I want to see the tight ends more involved downfield. And you already touched on it a little bit with more active in seam routes. That fits Eli Raridan's skill set, like we've talked about before. Hitting tight ends more on deep in routes, deep over routes, especially if, and it all kind of, the domino effect all starts adding up, right? If Malachi Fields is more effective in the boundary and you get Jaden Greathouse more effective, going throughout the game. Notre Dame's tight end room hasn't had the impact that it did in 2022 when Michael Mayer was somebody that you had to ID the second he stepped onto the field and you had to know where he went. Mitchell Evans had a few games in 2023 where it was like that, but unfortunately we didn't get to see the culmination of it because he tore his ACL in November. And then this season he was working his way back. It wasn't the same. Now, with that being said, I think Eli Raridan has the skill set to do it. You have a really talented true freshman coming in James Flanagan. And if Cooper Flanagan can come back healthy, you have three different types of pass catchers at the tight end position that I would like to see that utilized a little bit more. But for me, Bryan, that's the scheme adjustments that I would like to see in 2025, or just maybe not even adjustments, just see more of it. Because when it was used in 24, it was really, really effective.
I'm curious if we're going to see more play action next season. We did not see a lot of true play action this year. We saw a little bit of it. A lot of the play action we saw, and if you look at like the PFF numbers, a lot of the play action that they count as play action was sort of like the flash fakes. It wasn't like a real play action. There's a little bit of it. I would like to see a little bit more of it. I'm not someone who believes you need to run 7, 8, 9 play action passes a game. I'm more like, give me 2 to 3, 3 to 4 really well-designed play action passes. One meant to be a screen or two, a couple shots, but a lot of play action passes also are things where you're looking to open up the intermediate route, where a play action pass is meant to like take the top off the coverage. And in Alabama, you talk about, past teams, Alabama in 2020 made a killing on this concept. And at times they'd run it off play action, where they'd put Devontae Smith in the boundary or in the slot on one side. They'd take the two receivers and they'd run them on deep, like hard post route. So like just a really hard post to get that safety and corner going. And then Devontae would either like kind of a quick motion or a stack would then run an over route. Sometimes they'd run off drop back, but they'd also run it off play action to kind of just get that quick bite that opens up the quick bite from the linebackers doesn't really impact the read as much as it opens up that initial path to get behind them on the climb, and then they lose him. And then once you take the top off that coverage, you've got that open window out there to kind of get that ball to. So it's not just about hitting running play action, hit a go route or a post route. I don't love throwing play action, those routes off play action. As a quarterback, I hated throwing play action post routes. She's like, dude, I got a good arm, but I'm not that good of a freaking arm. You know what I mean? Like, how long do you know what I mean? Like, I'm more of like a, hit that outside go ball, but I'm more off of like hit the quick post off of an RPO. That's a play action pass. Even though it's not play action, it's getting you play action. You know what I mean? So you're not blocking play action, but it's
Sure.
having the impact of play action. So we saw that in the Super Bowl. They scored a touchdown off a play action pass, basically. It was an RPO, but it has the same impact as a play action pass. Even though in your playbook it doesn't say play action, it's an RPO. It has the same effect of play action. But I like doing the stuff where I'm getting more of a clear out and getting under routes and over routes and deep in cuts off of play action more so than let's run play action, hit bombs. Like, yeah, if you got Pat Mahomes, you can throw the ball from your own 40 and a guy can catch it 2 yards before he gets out of bounds. Yeah, sure, you can run play action any freaking route you want. But 99.9% of quarterbacks don't have his arm or Josh Allen's arm to be able to make that kind of throw. So it's just got to be different. But I do think if you're going to run the ball as effectively as they are, using more play action would be good. Even like we saw Georgia steal a page from Georgia's book. They ran that jet sweep action and just had the running back and Northern, and they stole it from Northern Illinois. I think, I mean, saw it on film, but like Northern Illinois ran that in week 2 where they just ran that jet sweep action. And Georgia did a little bit differently. They actually had the back that ran the jet, just ran the wheel. What Northern Illinois did is they had a lead blocking back. So they faked the jet sweep with the receiver, and then Ontario Brown ran the wheel route. The linebacker bites, and you just hit that sucker right. I mean, even something like that with your running backs, I mean, you put Aeneas in the game, and he's your lead blocker, and you run Jeremiah on a jet sweep look, and you don't think they're going to bite down on that and let Aeneas just come wide open on that wheel route? Of course they will. So there's a lot of things that I think Mike Denbrock has in his tool belt. And I know that Mike Denbrock runs plays like this because you want to know how I know that? Go watch the first play of the game in 2023 at LSU. They ran a wheel route to the running back on the first play of the game for a big play. I'm actually going to go look that up right now because it might have actually been on the similar concept to what Notre Dame did, which would actually kind of make that really funny. But I'm actually going to go pull that game up here real quick. It was last year's game. It was the one that was it in Baton Rouge or was it in Florida? I forget which. It was Florida. The game was played in Florida because the 22 game was played in Baton Rouge, or not Baton Rouge, but New Orleans. It's YouTube in their commercials, man, I swear. All right, let's get to this play. So it was first play of the game. They ran a jet sweep to the right and to kind of set up like their little slide screen. The running back runs a little quick inside, like outside zone to the left. Jaden Daniels boots to the right, and the running back keeps going up the left sideline, and Jaden Daniels hits him wide open. Every quarterback on the roster can make that play. So we know that stuff is in Mike Denbrock's toolbox, but for some reason he didn't feel good going to that stuff this year. And a lot of that's going to be about personnel. And so I think next year you're going to see the personnel better suited to kind of have that type of work. And it's not the running backs that was the issue. That play needed time to throw. You weren't a team that was great at giving time to throw. That required a quarterback to be able to make certain reads and throws that maybe Riley wasn't comfortable with. So there was something that held him back, but I want to see more of that stuff next year. That's a big part of it.
So, Bryan, we've been talking a little bit about personnel, which I think is going to be a good transition to talk about the last topic that we have, is just some reasons of optimism for this 2025 passing offense. But listen, folks, before we get there, go ahead and hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, share this podcast with your friends and family. Whichever platform you guys watch us on, we'd really appreciate it if you left us a 5-star review. And all the conversation topics that we have going on today, that's been going on in the chat, are guaranteed to be going on at boards.irishbreakdown.com. It's a great community over there, and there's a lot of conversation around what this team is and what it has been, what it could be. So check us out at boards.irishbreakdown.com. All right, Bryan, the last thing that we're going to talk about today is the reasons for optimism that we have for this passing offense. We spent some time breaking down where they need to get to, what it means for them to get there, what we would like to see, what have been the issues of the past. but there's a lot of reasons why we feel extremely confident in the trending upwards direction of this offense. And we saw little snippets of it in the postseason, but now we need to see it over the course of the season. So where do you start? When you start thinking of reasons for optimism, where are you at?
Mike Denbrock. I mean, that's my biggest reason for optimism, because I've seen what he can do when he runs an offense. We saw it at Notre Dame. What's the last explosive passing attack Notre Dame had? It was in 2015. I mean, they had, and this is why I keep saying, like, Mike Denbrock is going to run an offense that fits his personnel. And in 2015, you know what they had in abundance at receiver? It wasn't speed. I mean, it wasn't, It wasn't size. It wasn't strength. I mean, your biggest receiver from the year before, Corey Robinson, was not 100% in 2015. Your next best receiver was CJ Procise, who you moved from running back to running back. But what did you have in abundance with Will Fuller and Chris Brown and Amir Carlisle? Speed. And so what did they do a lot of that year? Did a lot of stuff to generate big plays using speed, post routes, go routes, crossing routes, things like that. And they played to it. And so then Notre Dame was able to utilize their speed. So we know that he will fit what they are, what the personnel is. And so he's a guy that is a proven track record. He's built outstanding offenses at Notre Dame in the past. He built an outstanding offense at Cincinnati by his final years. I mean, we talk about what does your pass game do in their biggest moments, and obviously in 2021, they were just outclassed by Alabama. They didn't have the players to be able to compete with Alabama. But look what they did throwing the football against Notre Dame in 2021. 19 of 32 for 297 yards, 9.3 per attempt, 2 touchdowns, no picks, and a 157.97 quarterback rating against a pretty good Notre Dame defense that year, and Marcus Freeman running the defense. You go look at what he did in the AAC title game. They only threw the ball 11 of 17 times, completed 11 of 17 passes in a 35-20 win, but it went for 190 yards, 11.2 per attempt, 3 touchdowns, and a 216.83 passer rating. And you turn Desmond Ridder into a legitimate, big play passer. So we've seen the moments where they've been able to do that at Tulsa with the talent he had there. I mean, at Cincinnati, he also did it against Tulsa the year before in the AAC title game. 19 of 29 for 269 yards, 9.3 per attempt. So we saw what he was able to do at Cincinnati, the way he was able to build those pass offenses and be effective in those seasons. And we saw what he did at LSU in his 2 years there. And now it's about, okay, now you're going into year 2 at Notre Dame. I think the system will be more geared to fit what he ultimately wants. Not that he has any issue building an offense around Riley Leonard. It's more so as like, hey, I'm going to build a great offense around you, young man. But we're going to try to take things to another level as we get the offense where I want it to be. And that's where we're talking about. So, when you get to that point, if you look at the 2015 offense, for example, with your backup quarterback playing all but the first 7 quarters of the season, you averaged 8.7 yards per attempt, 14 yards per completion. That's a pretty good number. Completion percentage decent. Wasn't where you needed to be, 62.6. You did throw 10 interceptions that year, 25 touchdowns. Part of that was you had a redshirt freshman quarterback who made he just wasn't a great decision maker in Deshaun. Had some really bad picks that year. But you threw for 258.8 yards per game. A lot of those numbers were where you want them. If Notre Dame this season, for example, Trev, if you're to tell me next year Notre Dame's going to average 8.7 yards per attempt and 14 yards per completion, I'm like, we're going to have a lot of freaking fun watching this football team.
Yeah.
A lot of fun watching this football team. Now, there's other things about that offense that need to get better. They had 20 turnovers that year, 10 fumbles lost and 10 interceptions. Can't have that, right? But when I look at it, it's there were aspects of it there that were there. And, that the turnovers are why that team didn't score more. There's other reasons why that team didn't score more, but some of the numbers were really impactful. And the other thing is you saw that part of that pass game step up in those big games. They threw the ball, they struggled early against Clemson, but then really stepped up in the second half, started getting some things going. And again, you talk about Mike Denbrock knowing how to use running backs. What was the play that sparked Notre Dame's comeback against Clemson in 2015, Trev? Let's test your memory. Right?
It was
Don't
a
you
wheel
hate it when I
route.
do this? And
No, it was a wheel route to CJ Procise.
My man, out of the backfield, 50-yard touchdown. That's exactly right. And so he utilized that, and that sparked Notre Dame's comeback. I'm so glad you got that right. Sorry that I tested you that way, but it's just fun, kind of fun, because I usually know you're going to get it right. They were down 21-3 at that point in time. And this is the fourth quarter, and that sparked their comeback. And then they hit a crossing route to Will Fuller, crossing route to Chris Brown. But they end up going 19 of 34 for 321 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a pick in that game. Now, there's some plays they missed, some reads they missed. Deshaun Kaiser had Alize Mack wide open up the seam in the first half for a touchdown, but ended up throwing a go route to Corey Robinson in double coverage. I mean, so the decision-making still has to be better. But schematically, they were there. And you go back and look at that same season, and you think of the other big game they lost against Stanford. They lost to 3 teams that year that finished in the top 5. Clemson, who was the national runners-up, Ohio State, who had the most talented team in the country, and then Stanford, who also finished that year in the top 5, that Christian McCaffrey-led Stanford team. They lost to Stanford 38-36. They didn't lose that game because of their offense. Now, because their offense couldn't score. The Deshaun Kaiser turnovers hurt you, that fumble he had late in the first half. But the point is, your offense was moving the ball in that game. And in that game, Notre Dame went 13 of 25. That's it. But for 234 yards and a touchdown. And then rushed for 299. I mean, so your offense was putting in the work in that game. Deshaun had a few misses in that game, but the point is, you hit the big plays. You complemented your run game effectively. And even in the Ohio State game, Deshaun goes 22 of 37 for 284 yards and 2 touchdowns. You struggle in that game because A, your defense could not stop Ohio State. And then B, your run game was ineffective. But they started kind of getting going in the second quarter of that game. If you remember correctly, Trev, they started kind of putting some work in. It was 28-14 at halftime, and then you score in the third quarter and make it 28-21. And then, of course, Ohio State goes right down the field and But the offense was kind of doing the work back then. Think of that offense with this defense. Think about that. Think about that 2015 Notre Dame offense with all its warts, losing your starting running back, losing your starting tight end, losing your starting quarterback, as it was, with no changes, with all the turnovers, and give it this year's defense or last year's defense. And we're talking about that's a fun team to watch that can beat anybody. And so we've seen him, the point is we've seen him do it at 3 stops. It's not like he was mediocre at Notre Dame and mediocre at Cincinnati, but then he had that one magical year with Jaden Daniels at LSU. We've seen him do it all over. And at some places, he needed more time. At Cincinnati, they needed more time. At LSU, he needed a year. At Notre Dame, he needed a year because that 2014 offense was pretty darn good too.
Man.
With Everett Golson.
Man.
But until all the injuries sunk in. But that's my optimism right there, Trev, is you got Mike Denbrock, who's got a proven track record, in my opinion.
And to your point, Bryan, another reason why I'm optimistic about Mike Denbrock is because those offenses weren't the same. You know what I mean? I think it would be another thing, too, if you look at, okay, well, he's had success at this stop at Cincinnati and LSU and Notre Dame back in the 20-teens, but they were all the same type of offense. I think that would give me a little bit of pause going into 2025. I think it's just a testament to Mike Denbrock is a chameleon. He can morph his game plan. He can morph his schematics based on the team that he has in front of him. Now, obviously, through recruiting, he wants to build it more to the scheme that he wants to run. But Cincinnati in 2021 could not have been a more polar opposite offense of LSU in 22 and 23. But he ran effective offenses with all 3 of those because he's a good offensive coordinator. It's the same thing with Notre Dame back in 2015. They had a lot of speed, but that team didn't have a Brian Thomas, a 6'4" guy who could take the top off a defense like that. Kind of had it, I guess, with Alec Pierce, because now I guess he's a deep threat for the Colts.
He was 6'3". He wasn't Brian Thomas, but yeah, I mean, think of the big play they hit against Notre Dame with him up the seam on that last drive of the second quarter. Yeah, he had some wheels. He could be that guy there.
But it's all been with different personnel.
And that year he dominated. He also had 2 tight ends put up a lot of numbers too with Leonard Taylor and Josh Wiley.
Yeah,
so even though he had the 3-man receiving core who had 3 guys in that receiving core in 2021 that all got drafted, I think 4th round or higher. He had Alec Pierce, Tyler Scott, and Trey Tucker, and he had Michael Young on that team. But his tight ends still combined for 54 catches, over 600 yards, and 10 touchdowns, even with all the production at receiver. But yeah, Alec Pierce averaged 17 yards a catch. He was their number 1 receiver. Their number 2 receiver in yards, number 3 in catches was Tyler Scott. He averaged 17.3 yards per catch. To your point.
Man. But it's all room for optimism for me for Mike Denbrock because he's able to do it with different styles of offenses. You've seen some coordinators go from spot to spot that it's, they have the same personnel. Might be different players, different names, and they continue to have the success at different schools. Mike Denbrock's been able to do that with different personnel groupings. Now, diving more specifically into that personnel, another reason why we're extremely confident in this offense taking off is the quarterback room and the state of the quarterback room. We covered a lot of different topics when we had the show about quarterbacks, but Bryan, give us a high-level overview. Quarterbacks, why is that one of your reasons for optimism?
Just because you feel like moving forward, whether it's this season or 2026, you just feel like there's just too much talent in the room for someone not to emerge and be that guy. And in the past, there's been so many years where it's like, if the starter doesn't do this, then they're in trouble. If Riley Leonard wasn't that guy this year, they would have been okay. They'd have still been a good team. They're not playing for a championship, but they wouldn't have gone off a cliff. And offensively, I'm referring to, 2022, Tyler Buckner goes down, and God love Drew Pine. He did it. He played his absolute best. He's a great kid, but you needed your defense to be outstanding. You needed your special teams to be the best in the country. You needed your run game to take over because Drew wasn't putting a team on his shoulders and leading them to a championship. I mean, that's just kind of who you were. And I think of like 2020, if Ian Book would have got hurt in 2020, I'm trying to even think who they had. Brendan Clark and Drew Pine as a freshman. That was their backup quarterbacks in 2020. If Ian Book got hurt, you were done. I mean, your team was toast. 2021, you're relying on a true freshman Tyler Buckner or a sophomore Drew Pine. There was such a big drop-off. And now, just God-given talent, you have 3 quarterbacks that are better throwers than anybody you had on your 2022 roster. Because think about it. You're comparing senior version of Steve Angeli to freshman version of Steve Angeli. You're comparing CJ Carr to Tyler Buckner, or let's say CJ Carr to Drew Pine, trying to match skill sets, and then Kenny Minchie to Tyler Buckner as passers. Or let's go 2021. You're comparing Steve Angeli to Jack Cohn. Okay, that might be a little bit, Jack's got more mentally, but Steve's got a stronger arm than Jack does. He's a better athlete than Jack was. Or you've got CJ Carr against redshirt freshman Drew Pine, or Kenny Minchie as a junior against freshman version of Tyler Buckner as a passer. I mean, just kind of go down the line, the depth at quarterback, and we're not even talking about Blake Hebert, who we don't expect to be a factor in 2025, but he will be down the road. You're going to have Noah Grubbs coming in after that, who's got a ton of arm talent. So you've recruited the position so effectively in recent years, and what's funny is it's been multiple guys doing it, right? Obviously, Tommy Rees landed the 3 that are currently there. I mean, for all the people that want to kind of be like, Tommy Rees sucked. Well, all the excitement we all have at quarterback for next year, he recruited all 3 of them. He recruited Steve, he recruited Kenny, and he recruited CJ. All 3 of them. Well, thank you, Tommy. It's kind of like how I said, Tony Alford's parting gift to Notre Dame was a class of Dexter Williams and Josh Adams as he left for Ohio State. Well, Tommy Rees's parting gift was, all right, I'm out. I'm heading to Alabama, and my parting gift to my alma mater is Kenny Minchie and CJ Carr. Thank you. Appreciate you. You know what I'm saying? And so just the arm talent in that room is so good, Trev, so good. It's gonna be really just. That's where I'm excited, and it fits what Mike Denbrock wants to do. Because yes, Kenny Minchie's an athletic kid that can run, but make no mistake, Kenny Minchie's two most important traits involve what's up here and what's right here. Like the running is a nice little like icing on the cake, so to speak. I don't really like that one because why have a cake if it's not going to have icing? How about a little bit of a cherry on top, right? I don't need a cherry on top. It's nice to have, though. I want icing on my cake. That's just ridiculous saying. As soon as you say, like, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my life. Of course you want icing on your cake. Like my least favorite, you want your cake and eat it too. Well, why would I want a cake if I can't eat it? Of course I want my cake and I want to eat it too. That's the dumbest expression I've ever heard. Cherry on top's a better one. Kenny's running ability is a cherry on top to a wonderful Sunday. And CJ's a pretty good athlete too that can run, which again, cherry on top of a wonderful Sunday. Steve showed he's got some mobility. Now, there's a difference between pocket feel, which Steve is not good with so far, but then being athletic enough to run. He's shown he can scramble and run. He showed that against Oregon State, but please, for the love of God, Steve, don't try to hurdle anybody because we almost saw you get your neck broke against Oregon State. That was very scary. I'm being dead serious. That was scary when he landed. I was like, oh, my God, that's not good.
Yeah.
So don't do that again. But we saw against Purdue, he can break tackles. He can run. He's a good athlete. They're all good athletes. But they're all number one traits are all their minds and their arms. That's what I want to see. And that's what has me excited because, and again, I know this is going to piss off the Steve Angeli fans. And again, Steve Angeli's a more talented quarterback than Drew Pine. I've said this before. Notre Dame's going 10-2 next year, no matter who's a quarterback. But to me, anyone that's being honest and objective is going to look at CJ and Kenny and say, but that's different. That doesn't mean they're going to be better quarterbacks. We're talking about just throwers. You can be a better thrower, not a better quarterback. But just as far as the arm strength, the velocity, the ball placement, the accuracy, it's just different with those two kids. And it's been a long time since I've seen a Notre Dame roster with one CJ Carr or Kenny Minchie, much less two. And those teams did not have a Blake Hebert and a Steve Angeli also on the roster. And that's what gets me, because the margin for error is so much greater now. God forbid you have to turn to Steve Angeli because the two young guys aren't ready. You know what? You can win a lot of games with Steve Angeli. Okay, CJ Carr gets beat out by Kenny Minchie, and so does Steve Angeli. Woe is us. I guess we're going to have that super arm-talented, smart kid from Tennessee that's athletic running the team. Oh, no. Heaven forbid. Or, well, I guess they're going with a redshirt freshman that's never played a meaningful down. I don't know how we're going to survive with that arm talent leading the offense. It's almost like you can't be upset with whoever wins the job unless you're just so obsessed with like a guy winning it. And that's why I've said to you, like, if Steve Angeli, who I think is number 3 on the list as far as talent, but if Steve Angeli goes out there in a open, real competition, fair competition, beats out Kenny and Steve, let's roll. Because he's going to have to be pretty good to beat those guys out. Let's roll. If Kenny beats out Steve and CJ, let's roll. If CJ, let's roll. As long as it's an open, honest competition. And heck, even Blake Hebert comes out there and just dominates. Okay, let's roll. They're all talented kids. And they can all win a lot of games in Notre Dame, but they can bring the passing element that Notre Dame needs a lot more of. And so that's my second biggest reason. And they're working with an offensive coordinator that has shown he can get a lot out of quarterbacks everywhere he's been. And that excites me.
Yeah, Bryan, I don't have too much to add. We talked about quarterbacks last week. I think you hit all the major points for me. It's just the one that I would echo is your opportunity of missing is just so much smaller now because you have all of the talent pieces. To your point, if Ian Book goes down, you're kind of scratching your head. Yeah.
You may not win another game.
Yeah. Actually.
You're a 500 team at best if Ian Book goes down in 2020.
So you go through and you look at just all of the different times. It's the last time I felt like this really since like a 2015. If you go back and just look at the whole state, of a quarterback room. In 2015, Malik goes down. Deshaun steps in. He has a pretty good season. But even if Deshaun Watson were to go down, you have a guy that was highly touted in Brandon Wimbush. And so you look at the different opportunities that room could have had. leaves you feeling pretty confident. But in other years, it hasn't been that way. So for me, when I look at the quarterback room, the thing that gives me the most optimism is whoever they go with, assuming all things are a fair competition, they're going to put Notre Dame in a really, really good spot to win. And one, if this past season showed us anything, if a player has the opportunity to get hurt, they could get hurt, right? But for me, it's just if Steve wins, you have Kenny or CJ, and then you could just go down the list. And no scenario is a bad scenario where you're like, ooh, well, I guess we'll just hope Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price combine for 2,000 rushing yards this year to get us to where we need to go. It's
right.
They're going to be in good hands.
This O-line better be really good. Or
right.
Yeah, like, it's almost like if you can't get it right with this quarterback room, you know me, Trev. I'm not one of those I believe in curses. I'm not one of those but it's almost like, I don't believe in curses, but I'm starting to at least think I need to at least revisit it if you can't over the next couple of years get it right with this group.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't know how you're going to do it. I mean, this is a really talented room. I graded Kenny Minchie as a 4-star quarterback, top 100 player with 4.5-star upside. That means that of a top 50 player. I graded CJ Carr as a 5-star coming out and a 5-star now. I mean, an upside. I mean, the talent is immense. And Steve Angeli's no bum. Blake Hebert I graded as a top 150 quarterback with an even higher ceiling because he's still kind of raw. So I just, if you can't get it right with this group, you either got the wrong quarterbacks coach, or which I don't think is true because he also is the guy that developed Desmond Ridder, or I may have to rethink this whole curse thing, which I don't believe in, but I may have to rethink it. There's something we're gonna have to do, like an exorcism. I mean, it's the Catholic Church. Hey, y'all need to come to Notre Dame and do some exorcisms in the quarterback room because there's some spirit of something that's that's in there. That's like, I mean, just we got to figure this out because if you can't get it right with this group, man, I don't know when it's going to happen. And I'm telling you, if you can't get it right with CJ Carr, dude, I'm not talking about. That's the whole point. The whole point is it's not CJ or bust. It's Father David's like, I got to cover Bryan. Yes, seriously, Father David. If you can't get it right with this quarterback, you and I are going to go and we're going to do some serious spiritual warfare in the goog. I'm just saying. You know what I'm saying? We're going to have to handle some business because, I mean, there's just so much talent in that room. And it's not just CJ or bust or Kenny or bust or Steve or bust. I mean, I know people have kind of put themselves into camps because that's what we do. We don't apparently have the depth as fans to root for more than one quarterback on the roster. We can only be Angeli guys or Steve guys or CJ guys, or Kenny or CJ guys. But it's dude, as long as it's a fair, open competition and the right guy, and you pick the right guy, I don't care. Because there's talent in the room to do what you need to do. And that's got me excited. But, Trev, you can have all talent in the world at quarterback. But you got to have some dudes to throw the ball to.
Sure do. And this is another huge reason of optimism for us. It's the wide receiver room. And it's getting there. In years past, and we spent some time talking about it and what we must see in some of the issues, but the gap is starting to close at the wide receiver room. Call a spade, they still don't have a Jeremiah Smith in that room. They don't have a Ryan Williams in that room, but what they
either does anyone that's other than Ohio State and Alabama.
Right.
I mean, that's not the standard. There's no Jamar Chase. Well, nobody except for Ohio State has a Jamar Chase.
So for all those reasons, it leaves you confident in the state of the room. You look at what Jaden Greathouse did and how he ended his season. And I pay close attention to how players perform in the biggest moments. I would feel less confident wholeheartedly if Jaden Greathouse had that performance if his Penn State performance was against Navy and his Ohio State performance was against Army, and we're going into 2025, and it's well, at least we have Jaden Greathouse coming back, but you had those performances in the semifinals of the college football playoff and the national championship against two really, really good defenses. One of them was the number one ranked pass defense.
Great play he made on third down. We always talk about the Bo Collins catch, but if Jaden doesn't win to get open on that third down play against A&M, that drive never gets going. I mean, you think of the place he made. We talk about the slot fade for the touchdown against Penn State, but that was a huge play. But I would argue his three third down catches were just as big because they led to other scores. I mean, he needed to convert a third down on the last drive to even get in field goal range to have the game winner. So it wasn't just like he made a couple big plays here and there. It was a lot of big plays. A lot of big plays.
And then you go through and you look at what's coming in behind it. Jordan Faison's going to have another year under his belt. Hopefully he can stay healthy. You had 3 true freshmen in 2024 who now have a year of experience in Micah Gilbert, Cam Williams, Logan Saldate. Hopefully at least one of them can make the jump into getting into the rotation. Then you look at what's coming in via the transfer portal. Malachi Fields, who we're all really, really high on for what he has. His physical tool sets, his experience at playing the game, that's absolutely massive. I will lump tight ends in there as well. Hopefully they can stay healthy just as far as pass catchers go. But for me, you look at the wide receiver room, there's a lot of promise in there, Bryan. A lot of things to make you feel really confident about 2025.
Yeah, look, you got to get it all in this, and not just 25, but moving forward. It's got to get better. Here's the thing. I can acknowledge these two. I believe these two things are both true. Notre Dame absolutely can and must recruit better at wide receiver. I think that's a fact. They should recruit better. They like this 25 class. I like Scrap Richardson. I like Elijah Burris. And honestly, Jerome Bettis Jr.'s senior film was much better. To the point where I'm like, dude, take them. I don't have a problem with any of those guys. I have a problem with taking those guys and then passing on Dalen McCutcheon or Cooper Perry or not landing a Jalen Cooper in the class. That's more of the issue. You know, the year before recruiting, I mean, look, Cam Williams, Micah Gilbert, Logan Saldate. It's not a recruiting problem. You got to just show that you can develop those guys. I'm not worried about what happened as a freshman. I mean, you obviously have some concerns. You know, was Cam not ready? Is Micah Gilbert what? But the talent's there. Year before that, you still have. Even if you just look at who's on the roster, not even what left. You've got Jaden Greathouse. You've got Jordan Faison, and you've got KK Smith. And then, but there's another level you can and should get to. Every 2 to 3 years, you need to land a dude. You know, that's even a step above a Jaden. You need to land a Malachi Fields out of high school so you have him for 3-4 years, not going and getting him through a portal. And that's the kind of thing you need. I want to see more of. I need them to go get a Naeem Burrows in this class, or you know, some of the guys that I view are like the real. You got to go out. And I said of a group of 6 that includes Dylan Faison, Trent Mosley, Naeem Burrows, Connor Solomon, Caden Finley, Braden Robinson. You got to get 3 of those guys or 4 of those guys. I mean, there's a couple others on the board that are in that category, but you get the point that I'm making. Those you need to get a year where you have those type of guys. So we can acknowledge that recruiting a receiver has to get better and can get better. However, this season with Greathouse, you got super lucky with Jordan Faison. Let's be real. Notre Dame did not recruit Jordan Faison thinking he would become what he has been. They did not. If they thought that, they would have offered him a scholarship. They wouldn't have let him play lacrosse. They would have brought him in on scholarship. They did not think he was going to be that. They liked him. That's why they offered him a walk-on spot and recruited him to come play football. But they did not think he was going to turn into what he turned into as a freshman and now sophomore. You got lucky there. But you've got him. You've got Greathouse. You've got Cam Williams. Coach him up. You've got Micah Gilbert. Coach him up. Logan Saldate. Coach him up. You've got Malachi Fields coming in. You've got Will Pauling coming in. You're not asking Will Pauling to be your dude. You're asking him to, at best, be your number 2, most likely your 3 or 4. I can live with that, if that. You've got KK Smith also. So, and then at tight end, you've got weapons too. But just at receiver, there's enough talent there for you to have a really good passing game next year. You may have to do more of a group approach than just having that dude, and that's okay. But you can't say that they don't have the talent to be really good on offense next year at receiver. Can it get better? Yes. Does it need to get better? Yes. But it's still really good, and there's no excuses next year now that Greathouse is a junior, and he's already shown what he can do. Faison's a junior. He's shown what he can do. You got to find a way to get KK Smith healthy and coach him up. You got to coach up Cam Williams. I don't care how raw he is. I don't care. I had a story, Trev, that I was telling somebody the other day. when I got to Duquesne the year before, we were replacing the guy that was their all-time leading receiver, a kid named Jeremy something. I forget his name, but he was really good. He was like 6'2 and a half, 220, and he was with the Steelers at the time. He was in camp with the Steelers, and I was like, how did this 6'2", 220-pound guy that ran a 4.48 or something like that at 4.5, how did he end up at Duquesne? And they're like, he played in a triple option offense where he caught like 6 passes in his career. They're like, Bryan, this is a true story. I said, okay. We're out to eat at Fatheads one night. Or was it Fatheads? Yeah, Fatheads. And in Pittsburgh on the south side. And Gattuso was telling me the story. He goes, first day of camp, we were trying him at receiver. And we said, run a curl route. He's like, what's a curl route? He goes, you run about 10 yards and you sit down. He ran 10 yards and sat down. Literally sat down on the ground. He was that raw. And I'm like, look, okay, it is what it is. That's what you're working with. If Cam Williams is that raw, fine. That guy became the school's all-time leading receiver by the time it was done. Coach him up. Coach him up. Get him ready. The talent's there. Same with Micah Gilbert, Logan Saldate. So the point is, get them coached up. The talent's there. Coach it up. And then keep recruiting. And I love what Mike Brown's doing on the receiving corps, or on the recruiting trail right now. He's putting together a really good list of players, and it's growing. They're not counting. They're not saying, hey, we got a great group of 6 or 7. We don't need to offer anybody else. They just offered another receiver a couple days ago that's really talented. They're going to keep building the board. But now you got to close, right? That's the big thing, Trev, is you got to close. But the talent's there. I don't hear any excuses in 2025 about we don't have enough talent. No, you don't have a Jeremiah Smith. You don't have a Ryan Williams, but you got plenty of talent with the running game you have, because you know what those teams don't have? You know what Ohio State doesn't have? You know what Alabama doesn't have? Jeremiah Love. You know what I don't think Alabama has? CJ Carr. With all due respect to Julian saying, I don't think they have CJ Carr either. It's a good player. You know what they don't have? They don't have Notre Dame's tight end room. So I don't want to hear excuses. Okay, so maybe you're not as good as Ryan Williams or Ohio State. That's fine. I watched Michigan beat that team, and your receiving room is way better than theirs is. So I don't want to hear excuses about your receiver room. It's because guys are older. Coach them up, get them ready. And I'm excited to see what this group is going to do in year 2 of Mike Brown. I really am. Because we saw some growth from this group in the last 5-6 games of the season, Trevor, that has me kind of excited about what they're going to be now that you get another full off season with him. Really excited about that. So that's another reason why I'm excited about it. And then, of course, wrapping up, Trev, you know where else you have a lot of talent? And we didn't even get into running back tight end rooms in the pass game. That's definitely something that I think with Jeremiah Love and Aeneas Williams, like, you should definitely be throwing the ball more to your running backs next year. But the final reason I'm excited in big boys up front, Trev, there's a lot of talent in that room, dude. I mean, you could take your second team offensive line next year and be like, that's going to be your second team offensive line in 2021 would be better than the offensive line that Jack Cohn had to play for in 2021.
Absolutely. That room is loaded with talent. And now there's experience sprinkled throughout it as well. You have Anthony Knapp, who has 15 games under his belt. You have Emil Wagner, who has 16 games under his belt. Charles Jagasaw came back. You want to talk about how high they are on him? He came back in what everybody thought was a season-ending injury and started in the national championship game.
That dude has started 2 games his entire career. It's a bowl game and the title game. And the only other game he played in meaningful snap was the Orange Bowl. Like, just save him for the postseason. All right? Just say, hey, Jags, we're going to redshirt you. We're going to sit you next year until the playoffs. I mean, it's like, can we get a regular season snap out of Charles Jagasaw, please? Man. For the love of God. Can we get a meaningful regular season snap out of Jagasaw? We know he can ball out in the postseason. Can I get him for the regular season? But to your point, Trev, he's the least experienced guy on the roster, and he's the most talented. And they've just thrown him in with no experience, no prep into some big moments, and guess what he's done? He's played really well. They threw him in at left tackle in the national title game against JTT, and he had been playing guard up until that week since he came back from his injury. Right guard at that. And he looked exactly like he looked, like you'd expect him to look had he played all year at that position.
The dude's insane. And I know we've talked this offseason about how when you have the talent that you have at offensive line that Notre Dame has, nobody is a for sure starter. If 56 is not somewhere in that starting lineup, I will join you and Father David Penny on whatever conquest you guys are going on inside of the Goog, because I'm going to have way too many questions. But it's not just Charles Jagasaw, though. That room is now loaded with talent. You go and you look at what players did. Like I love what Pat Coogan and Rocco Spindler did. I do. The role that they took on in 2024 after being starters in 2023, there's something to say about that. And you commend them for what they did. But what Notre Dame has coming back to replace what that was, you have Billy Schrouth coming into his senior year, right? Academically, you have Ashton Craig, who's hopefully going to be back healthy from injury. You have Anthony Knapp, who will fit somewhere in along the offensive line, has started 15 games as a true freshman.
Maybe. Like, that's the thing, is like maybe.
Yeah. Maybe. You have guys like Sullivan Absher, who've been waiting in the wings, who's a massive person. You have Charles Jagasaw, arguably your most talented guy. And your second arguably most talented guy in the room is another player in Gerby Lambert, who's been waiting in the wings, developing, and will now have a full season under his belt. Oh, and the other person he's going to be in contention with is Emil Wagner, your only offensive lineman from 2024, who started all 16 games and remained healthy.
And you're bringing in a true freshman who is ranked as the number 4 overall player in the country by On3. And I graded as a 5-star as well.
A spoil of riches, Brian.
And Joe Otting looked really good when he got in backup moments this past year. I wasn't super high on Chris Tarrick when they signed him. He's impressed me. You have Styles Prescott, Peter Jones. I mean,
I'll say
talent in size is not an issue.
I'll say this. Your thoughts, which I have the same about the quarterback room, of there's kind of no way you get this wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of feel the same about the offensive line unit.
Yeah.
If
you screw this up, you shouldn't be coaching at Notre Dame. If you can't get this right, you shouldn't be coaching at Notre Dame.
Agreed. Absolutely agreed. But the offensive line room is absolutely loaded up with talent. Brian, do you have anything more to add and reasons for optimism?
I mean, it just sum it all up, Trev. It's just, man, there's so much talent there, and there's so much potential there. And look, it's gotta get all put together. I mean, there's a lot that has to happen for it to get put together. There's no doubt. It's not just going to be this thing where you roll the balls out, and you've got to coach it up. It's not so elite that you can't, like, you can't ruin Jeremiah Smith as long as you just put him on the field. Like, if he doesn't get a lick better from what he was the minute he arrived on campus, you're fine. Just don't. The only way you can screw him up is not playing him or not letting him, you know what I mean? Just, you don't throw him the ball. You can screw up Cam Williams. He's a guy that needs a lot more work and a lot more polish. Not all 5-star talents are built the same. So coach him up. Develop them. Coach up Micah Gilbert. Coach up KK Smith. Oh, we didn't have a lot of speed this year. Well, you got this cat number 11 that might be your fastest guy. Coach him up. You know, I mean, that's the thing, Trev. I'm at the point now where it's like between the loaded running back room with multiple. I mean, Janarian Price can catch the ball. He's more of a running back catching the ball, whereas Jeremiah and especially Aeneas catch the ball more like receivers. Jadarian's a good pass catching back. Kedron, like, really impressed me in fall camp and impressed. Ryan went and saw him at the Army game. Looked really good catching the ball there as a running back, meaning he's going to catch swings and screens and arrows and angle routes and things like that. Aeneas and Jeremiah can literally line up a receiver. I mean, we saw Aeneas run the best sluggo route that anyone's run all season for Notre Dame and catch a go ball that was not like he had to track that sucker. It was not just perfectly placed. He had to kind of, Willie Mays it a little bit. And then you look at Eli Raridan and you talk about, I mean, Jack Larson's might have the best hands on the team. When you go watch what he did in high school, I mean, that dude's hands are insanely good. I don't expect to see Cooper Flanagan. You got James Flanagan coming in as a top 100 player. And then you got quarterback talent, O-line talent. I don't know if, and look, I know some of you are going to think that I'm giving you, I'm not one for hyperbole. I've told you at times, and I don't think the talent's there, Trev. I really look at this roster of what we saw. Well, some of it's what we thought coming out of high school, but a lot of it's just what we've seen at Notre Dame. And you're just like, this team is the talent in this room is different. But on top of that, it's the depth of talent. In 2021, it was, or 2022, it was, if Lorenzo Styles and Deion Colsey have breakouts, they're going to be fine. If they don't, they're in trouble. And that's exactly what happened. They didn't break out, and you were in trouble. In 2023, it was, if Tobias Merriweather has the breakout we think, they're going to be just fine. And if he doesn't, you're in trouble. He didn't, and they were in trouble. And there's been these years where it's like you were counting on like one guy, and if he doesn't pan out, or two guys, if they don't pan out, you're in trouble. Now it's like, if this guy, even if you didn't have Malachi Fields and Will Pauling, I'd still say I think this receiving core can still be pretty good. I don't know if it can be good enough to win a title, but it's still pretty good, especially with the tight ends. But then you throw in Malachi Fields and Will Pauling, and you're just like, with the running, they're so talented, but there's depth of talent. I mean, let's just say, God forbid, you go into next year and something happens to Charles Jagasaw again, and I hope not. But we can't ignore it because he did get injured as a senior in high school, and he got injured this past season. Okay, so then you got to choose from a tackle room that includes Emil Wagner, Anthony Knapp, Gerby Lambert, and Will Black. I think you'll be okay. Ashton Craig gets hurt again. All right, I think Joe Otting or Anthony Knapp will be just fine at that position. I mean, you could lose Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price, and you're like, I guess we got to roll with Aeneas Williams, Keedron Young, and Nolan James then, and Jabron Payne. I don't know how we're going to survive, I say incredibly sarcastically. It's like the depth of talent is so exciting at every position. You're inexperienced at certain positions, but just God-given ability and athleticism and talent and size. I look at him like, what's the weakness? All the weaknesses are related to experience and proven production in this system. There's no like, I don't know if that guy's good enough. It's like, I don't know if that guy is ready to start now, but the talent is there. And that's what has me so excited. I don't know how the quarterback room is going to handle things from an experience standpoint, but you know what we're going to see next year? We're going to see some dimes. They are going to make mistakes too. They will. But we're going to see some throws you're like, And notice I didn't say if CJ Carr's the starter. If Kenny Minchie's the starter. I just said at quarterback next year, you're going to see some dimes. And at receiver next year, you're going to see some dudes going off at times. Now, can they do it consistently enough? Can they do it in the big games? Those are all question marks, but it won't be because of talent. That's what has me excited. It won't be because you had an injury or two. You're going to have a lot of injuries next year for this offense to be like, I don't know if you have the talent left. A lot. I mean, think about 2023. You needed your freshmen to play. Your freshmen this year were good football players, two of my greatest top 250 players, but you're going to need your freshman and sophomore class to lose 3 or 4 guys before they have to play. At least 2 guys before they have to play. That's a different situation. I hope that they play because they're talented, but you get what I'm saying? Just as far as need, it's not there.
You could make the argument, and this is kind of my final thought as a whole, wrapping up the offense. You could make the argument that outside of Leonard's legs and his experience, the offense as a whole has upgraded at every spot. Because
go ahead.
Yeah, because I mean, I would hear out like Coogan and Spindler's experience as well. Like that's another factor. But I love what Bo Collins did. I love that he came to Notre Dame and elected to finish out his season his career in South Bend. And with all of the flaws of last year's team, they still made it to the national championship. Hats off to the 2024 team. Mm-hmm. With that being said, I think Malachi Fields is an upgrade in the boundary. I do. I appreciate Chris Smith. I think he was misused. Mm-hmm. But literally, if Will Pauling comes in and just does that, and then you factor in what Jaden Greathouse can do and what Jordan Faison can do, and hopefully the development of all
what they've proven they can do.
Yes.
To your point.
Yes.
Right.
You could make the argument that at every spot on offense, outside of Riley Leonard's legs and his experience of playing in college football, they've upgraded at every spot. you could make that argument. And that's the way that I look at it. That's why I'm excited, man. That's why I'm so excited for this offense next year.
Well, you talk about like Bo Collins and hit what he did, and he did some good things, and I'm glad Bo came. Like they were better because Bo came. Yes, he didn't always do what, but whatever. You can appreciate what the young man did. But he ends his career, and including his time at Notre Dame, with 132 career catches for 1,780 yards and 14 touchdowns. That included what he did at this year Notre Dame. Malachi Fields shows up at Notre Dame with 129 career catches, 1,849 yards, 14.3 per catch, and 11 touchdowns. And he did that with only playing one game as a true freshman, as a sophomore, and he got hurt. And in that one game he played, he had 5 catches for 58 yards and a touchdown. And he got hurt, missed the rest of the year. And still has his production matches Bo's coming in. Will Paulding comes in, despite only having 1 catch for 6 yards as a freshman. He comes in with 129 career catches. Again, Bo had 132, and he has 1,372 yards. Bo had 1,780, right? So one guy has more higher yards per catch, and he has 9 touchdowns. Bo had 14. And so you're losing Bo Collins, and you're replacing with 2 guys that have matched his production already at the Power 5 level. And that's the difference. I mean, these guys are far more proven than what Jaden Harrison was coming out of Marshall. I mean, Jaden Harrison's best year was like 20-some catches for 400 yards at Marshall. These guys are coming. I mean, Will Paulding had more production than that in a disappointing season for him, or injury-riddled season. So you've got that, but now it's like, can they do it at Notre Dame? And those are all fair questions. Our point is not to say, guys, they're going to look like 2019 LSU this year. Not saying that. I'm not saying that guys are going to definitely average over 40 points per game this year. They're back in the title game, and they're going to win it this year. They're going to go 16-0. They're going to win every game by 20 points. I'm not saying any of that stuff. What I'm saying, however, is you have the talent to be a championship caliber offense. You've got to put it all together. But the talent's there. There's no excuses talent-wise anymore. There's no excuses depth-wise anymore. That's the difference. A year ago, you had Emil Wagner. Once Charles Jagasaw went down, you had Emil Wagner and Anthony Knapp playing. And that's really all you had at tackle besides a true freshman of Gerby Lambert, who wasn't an early enrollee. Now, you've got Emil Wagner, you've got Anthony Knapp, you've got Gerby Lambert. You're going to have a year 2 of you've got Charles Jagasaw, you got year 2 of Gerby Lambert, you got year 2 of Styles Prescott. You not only have Will Black, but you're also adding Matty Augustine and Owen Strebig to the mix. So again, it's just the talent's there. And then, somebody in the chat, Al Bundy in the chat just said tight end has me a bit concerned. That's the one fair concern because of the injury to Cooper Flanagan that I would say that's the position that I have some concerns about from a depth standpoint because of the injuries. Because if you lose Eli Raridan, you have to play Jack Larson and James Flanagan now. Ty Washington has played a lot of, decent numbers, not a lot, but he's played some snaps, but he's far from proven at Arkansas, far from proven. So that is the one position, I'll give you that, Al Bundy, where you could say, I'm concerned about the depth because of the injuries. Fair. But there's no questions about talent. And honestly, they could fix the depth problems with one move. One move. There's a transfer portal pickup they need to make from their own defense. Mike Denbrock needs to walk his hind parts down to Chris Ash's office and go talk to Marcus Freeman, go talk to Chris Ash, and to go sit down with Max Bull and say, all right, I'm gonna make a trade with you. I'm gonna get you a steak dinner if you give me Preston Zinner. That's what I'm doing. Give me Preston Zinner. He can play for me. You move Preston Zinner over to offense, and all of a sudden, all those, because we said this when he signed, I think Preston Zinner could play tight end in Notre Dame. In a different a movement tight end, a flex guy. He can catch the ball. He can block. I mean, he can run. He's 6'3", 240. No, he's not going to look like Mitchell Evans, but he's going to be able to absolutely think of Davis Sherwood, like the role Davis Sherwood had the last couple years, and then put a guy that's 2 inches taller, 10 pounds heavier, and a whole lot faster and more athletic in that role. So, dude, that's an easy fix. And you know what's going to happen to your linebacker depth if you make that move? Nothing. because he's not going to play for you anyway because you're so loaded at linebacker. You put him over to tight end, and not only did you get a depth player, you got a kid that can play, in my opinion. That's what I would do, and then all of a sudden you fix that. But I will grant Al's that is the one position, Trevor, where I am concerned about the depth from an injury standpoint. But if you just look at the roster, it's like that's a pretty good roster. But you have to account that Cooper's hurt, Cooper Flanagan's hurt, and Eli Raridan has only played one full season at Notre Dame, and that's this past year. That's fair. That is definitely fair. I'll give you that.
Agreed. I agree. Well, look, guys, that's going to do it for the offensive edition of this show. We broke down the passing offense and why we feel confident, the areas that they've lacked over the past couple seasons. But don't go anywhere. We have some mailbag questions in here that we're going to get to, and we're going to go for about an hour or until the questions kind of run out. So please be sure to get those in the chat. But before we get there, guys, please be sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, share this podcast with your friends and family. And of course, the best way to support what we do here is subscribe to the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. All right, Brian, it is mailbag time. As always, guys, if you want your question bumped to the top, be sure to put in a super chat. We will be sure to answer that ASAP, but we already have some questions in here to get to. Question from Chris W. From 1 to 10, how likely is Mickens heading to Texas?
This is what I love about the internet. So I had somebody text me last night is like, it sounds like Mickens is gone. And you get this question 1 to 10. And I reached out to some sources very close to the situation and was told, I didn't even talk to Mike Mickens yet. This is all built on some website said that these are going to be the top targets for Texas. So Mike Mickens is as good as gone to Texas, even though as of last night, him and Texas had not even talked. Now, could that change? Of course it could change. Of course it could. But that's what I love about the internet. Like I was told, everybody asked about the GM. I was told that Marcus Freeman has a pretty good idea of the couple targets he really wants to key on. But I've literally gotten text message or DMs from over 10 people that have reached out to say they're hearing that this is going to be the guy, and every single one had a different guy. Now, how can that all be true if I know for a fact that the list of candidates is much smaller than that, and Marcus Freeman is not? That's the whole point. People put all types of things out, and then they'll take things that people say. Like somebody sent me something the other day that, John Bryce is reporting this at Football Scoop. And I'm like, oh, wow, that's interesting. And I went around, I was like, that's not at all what John Bryce said. What you're saying he said is not what he said. And so then if it ends up being wrong, then people who you tell that to are like, well, John Bryce didn't know what he's talking about. Like, well, no, that's not what he said. So you're like what he said was like, hey, I don't even remember what it was, but it was like, it was very just a normal, it wasn't even a comment him saying this is going to happen. It was just like a normal reporting type of comment. And the way it was said back to me was like he was making some declarative statement about where it was. And I'm like, this is how stuff gets started, because he makes a comment, you take it and spin it into something else, and all of a sudden there's this comment, and if it doesn't work out, oh, John Bryce is the one. No, that's not what he said. You know what I mean? And this is where we're at. People throw out lists of coaches, and I've told you guys this, and I tell you this every year. 9 times out of 10, the list you see when a job comes open is not what people are hearing. It's what they want. And they're passing it off as this is what I've heard. And that's not journalism. That's writing clickbait stuff. Now, could that change? Could Texas reach out to Mike Mickens and go after him? Of course they could. And they'd be stupid not to, because he's the best in the business. But right now I'm giving that a 1 because they have not talked. If that changes, I'll let you guys know. But that is where I'm at. And that's what just, and this is the same thing. 1 to 10, how close is the next GM to being hired? Right now, a 1, because he has not begun the final process. I would expect maybe some movement by the end of this week or next week as far as like zeroing in on Henry. But they're not in a hurry to make this move. They've got people in place that are running recruiting. The coaches are handling recruiting. He wanted to get some other moves made, like, landing one of the best running backs in the business, getting your defensive coordinator. This move will get done. You're in good place right now. You're fine. It doesn't need to be rushed. I've been told he has an idea of who he likes. And it was true when he was talking to James Blanchard. Clearly James Blanchard was number 1, but he wasn't the only guy on Freeman's board. There's a couple other guys that 2 or 3 other guys at least that I know he likes a lot. And Blanchard thing didn't work out. Now it's time to move on to those next guys. But you also need to give a little bit of time in there, so it's not immediately like, hey, we're immediately turning to you after losing Blanchard. You got to play this right, and so that's kind of where they're at right now. But how close are they? Three. I'll be at 3. They're going to make a hire. I expect it to happen over the next few weeks at the very latest. But just patience, my good friends, patience. Here's the other one from Tommy. I had to give him this one because we accidentally, I don't know how it happened, but he got banned from the site somehow. I don't know how it happened. And when you ban someone on StreamYard, you can't undo it. There's no undoing process. So I spent 2 days trying to figure it out. And because I think it was during I think maybe a post-game show or something. And when the chat's moving quickly, you can start to ban someone else, but if it moves, it goes to and I think that's what happened. But so he had to, so he goes, I owe him this question. So I'll give you this one, buddy. I'll give you this one. We'll answer this one.
Where does Cracker Barrel rank in your list of top breakfast spots?
Just outside my top 5. I mean, it's good. My dad likes it more than me. I kind of like it because you can do some shopping for some snacks and stuff on your way out the door, because they have most Cracker Barrels the ones I've ever been to always have those little shops. Those are always kind of nice, and they'll usually have like some candy I haven't had in a long time. Like, oh, hey, look, I haven't had that in forever. But I mean, it's okay. It's fine. My dad likes it a lot more than I do. It's in his top 3. Original Pancake House in town is a really good one. And so it's over by Notre Dame. There's a place down the street from our house called Copper Creek that I really like as well out in Granger. IHOP's good. I am actually someone who likes IHOP. I like Denny's too. I mean, maybe it's just because of the hours you can go get at Denny's. And then there's another place in town, Metro Diner, that has really good breakfast food as well. Just off the top of my head, those are probably my top 5. I've never eaten at Nick's Patio. I've heard that's got really good breakfast. I've never been. I think Vince told me they have good breakfast, or I can't remember who did, but yeah. But just those are the places I've been. That'd be probably my top, especially locally.
My mix, Cracker Barrel for me is somewhere in my top 5. I don't think it cracks my top 3. I go there and I get the same thing every single time. I get the Country Boy breakfast. It's a sirloin steak, 3 eggs over easy, 2 sides of hash brown casserole and biscuits. Get the same thing every time, and it's all for like $11.99. So I love it. So Cracker Barrel somewhere in there for me. I don't have like a 5, 1 through 5. I can just give you 5. There's one here in Indy, Lincoln Square Pancake House. I love them. They're really good. Up in Elkhart, I love Bristol Street Cafe. I've been going there since high school. That place is fantastic. Very cheap. I get the corned beef hash omelet whenever I go. So if you guys know what Bristol Street Cafe is, definitely check that out. Outside of that, it's probably I like Perkins. I would go there a lot with my grandma. That was kind of our spot.
I've never been there for breakfast. Interesting.
Yeah, I go there. They had really good omelets, so that's what I would get. And that's out of that. Just one of the chains.
When I was a kid, there were 2 places we would go for breakfast in Lime, Ohio. We'd go to a place called Banditos. It was a Mexican restaurant, but on Sunday afternoons they would serve like a normal brunch, and we would go there. It had a really good buffet. And then Ponderosa also had a really good breakfast buffet when we were kids.
Really?
We'd go to Ponderosa. Yeah. Yeah, it was really good. I've never been to Perkins for breakfast though. My favorite breakfast thing to have is, I don't know what it is, but Hardee's bacon, egg, and cheese biscuits are elite. I know that everyone else is going to be like, you're an idiot. It's freaking fast food, and it may be, but I love bacon, egg, and cheese biscuits from Hardee's. It's the only thing I'll eat from Hardee's. But yeah, their bacon, egg, cheese biscuits are elite. They're elite. We ate at this one breakfast place in San Francisco back in 2010. That was like this little tiny little diner type of place, and we had to wait like an hour in line outside, and it was worth it. It was really good. I can't remember what it was though. But yeah, those are my favorite breakfast places. But yeah, Hardee's bacon, egg, and cheese biscuit. If I can only have one thing for breakfast, it's bacon, egg, and cheese biscuit from Hardee's. There's no doubt. I know I'm weird, but that's where I'm at. I don't like McDonald's breakfast, but I do like, if I could get a McGriddle but have better egg. Because like McDonald's egg kind of is not good, and their bacon's hit or miss. But the rest of their breakfast, I don't really mess with. But the Metro Diner and Original Pancake House and Copper Creek are my top places locally to go to outside of the more chain places. I don't know if we have a Denny's around. Do we have a Denny's around here? I don't know that we have a Denny's around here. You grew up around here. Do you remember there being a Denny's anywhere?
I think there was one at one point in Mishawaka.
Okay.
But that Elkhart and Mishawaka and all that has changed so much since I've lived up there.
True. That's true.
I mean, man, there's like 6 Denny's within a baseball throw of my apartment. So,
oh wow,
yeah, that was our thing in college. We would always, whenever we were hungry, we would go there at 2 a.m. and get their nachos.
Yep. I've done that. I mean, I've done that after some Notre Dame games, because the game would get over super late, and there'd be a Denny's by my hotel. So I'd go to the Denny's and do work from Denny's and have some breakfast, and
Nice.
Yep. Went to many a Denny's after parties in college. Because I would have to always be, I'd drive my drunk friends from place to place, because I was always the DD, designated driver. For those who don't know what that is, I think everybody knows what that is. But yeah, to many a Denny's. But it's good food, though. I actually like their food. Well, I haven't been there in a while, but I used to like their food. I don't know if it's still good, but yeah. Some interesting questions today.
That was good. D-Rock Irish. Are cutoff jerseys allowed in college football? I thought the NCAA prohibited wearing them, yet I've seen certain players wearing them throughout the season. If not allowed, what are the consequences?
Dude, I don't know that they really do anything with uniforms anymore. I mean, you used to have knee pads of your knees. Now I see guys basically wearing like girdles, essentially for games. It's like I see teams that wear more. I mean, we wore more on Thursday shell practices than skill players, corners wear now in games. It's ridiculous. So I don't know that they really enforce any kind of jersey rules anymore, to be honest with you. I don't know what they've clearly changed the rules, or they just stopped enforcing the rules. I don't have a clue.
I think they stopped enforcing them. I looked this up when I saw it come in. They technically, after the 2015 season, when Zeke Elliott made like the crop top jersey popular, they banned it, but there's still players that roll up their jersey. I don't know if there's some fine print thing where you can have an undershirt on under it now. I have no idea, but I'm with you. I mean, even back when I was playing in high school and things like that, you had to have knee pads that came under or that protected, your knees. And now there is a player
in college, man. They would just, I mean, they'd have a couple refs that would go for each player. And like, there's times where I'd have a guy walk up behind me and like a ref and like pat me on the backside. Like, dude, what? He's like, I'm just checking to see if your butt pad is there. I mean, you could have asked, bro. Like, you know what I mean?
Say, man, at least let me know, dog.
Like, yeah, give me a heads up. Like, hey, man, I need to check, but like they were super sticklers about that back in the day. Not anymore at all.
Now some skilled players don't even wear pads in their pants. Like sometimes they just wear the pants. Mm-hmm. That's crazy to see too.
Absolutely crazy. By the way, if you're just looking for donuts, back to the breakfast question, if you're just looking for donuts, the best donuts, in my opinion, on the planet are in Mishawaka, Indiana. Rise and Roll.
Yep.
The best donuts on the planet are at Rise and Roll. Fresh made every day. The cinnamon are good. The normal chocolate covered, the normal glaze, whether you like the custard filled, the cream filled. I mean, I don't know that I've ever not had a good donut at Rise and Roll. They're phenomenal.
So the first apartment that Lauren and I lived in after we moved out of like the college houses with the roommates and stuff, the first place we ever lived in together, there was a Rise and Roll on the first floor of the apartment.
Where was this?
In downtown Indy. And before every sales meeting that I would have, if I wanted to schmooze a client a little bit, I would go and pick them up Rise and Roll. But yeah, those donuts are fantastic. And then the Rise and Roll moved out of the apartment, so then Lauren and I moved. Not to the Rise and Roll, but
there you go.
Then we were just
there's one not far from Notre Dame. It's right on. It's on Grape, right? Grape is the one closest to Notre Dame, right? I always get those two. Right by the corner of Angela and Grape. They're so good. So good. They blow Krispy Kreme out of the water. I grew up on Krispy Kreme. They are way better than Krispy Kreme. They're actually real donuts.
Oh, yeah.
Krispy Kreme to me is only good when they're fresh, like warm. But I'm not a huge, like, it's just like more like, can I get some dough with this sugar, please? Like, I just, but these are really good.
Oh, they melt in your mouth.
Really good.
I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Amish donuts.
I don't know if there's multiples, but I know there's one on the corner of Grape and Angela right before you get, it's in between the Denver Mattress and the Marathon gas station on the right if you're heading towards Angela. On the left if you're passing Hanayori, which, by the way, is without a doubt the best Japanese steakhouse in town. It's phenomenal. Lou Samoji would take us there all the time. He loved going there. Like, all the chefs knew his name. It was great. But it's over there. Rise and Roll. Excellent donuts. Like, best I've ever had. And there was someone who was I know that you know who it is, but he kept coming in. We were somehow got to talking about those, and I hyped him up, and he's like, they're not going to be as good as you think. But I went and bought him some donuts, and he was like, oh my gosh. He was talking about them at the tailgate. He was like, those are the best donuts. That's all we were talking about with the donuts.
Every person that I've given Rise and Roll to, it's always like, all right, how good can this be? Don't overhype this, and they lived up to it.
It always does.
Somebody
asked about Uptown Kitchen, Steven Springfield. That's my wife's favorite breakfast place is Uptown Kitchen. She loves Uptown Kitchen. It's still around. I don't, but she loves it. But yeah, Trev, you can't oversell it because it's just their money every time.
They sell themselves. Literally. I mean, there's nothing you can get there that's bad. It's all Amish based too. So they have like Amish cheeses there. They have Amish peanut butter there. And if you've never had
it's more natural. It just doesn't feel as processed. It feels more like this was baked by my grandmother. Like that kind of thing. It's so good. So good. Yeah.
Question from Ballpeen Shillelagh. We all know that the inconsistent ref situation has been an increasing problem in college football. If it were up to you as the fictional commissioner of college football, how would you fix it?
Well, I think one thing that I would do is I would tell these leagues they need to invest in a permanent officiating class where these are their primary jobs. Where like, look, yeah, you can do things in the offseason if you want, but this is your number one responsibility. You're not some attorney or some accountant or some, gym teacher or whatever else that does officiating. They pay you $300 a game, but it's gotten to the point now where things cost so much in life and they don't really pay these guys that much. Not every league covers expense. Some do, but not every league covers expenses. You have to take it like out of your what you make. Is they need to make it like, look, this is an important piece to $1 billion industry. You need to pay it accordingly. And then when you pay it accordingly, you can then hold them to a higher standard. No union stuff. And if you're going to have some sort of officiating union, that's fine. But you better let them know, like, you are going to be evaluated on your job. And if you don't do the job, you will not be doing the job anymore. Because it has too big of an impact on the sport. Now, that doesn't fix everything because, as we've seen in the NFL, it's garbage there too. But I would say the NCAA needs to kind of give the leagues a certain standard that has to be met by every league, and then it's up for the leagues to then hire and train the officials to meet that more NCAA-wide standard. I think it's a lot of people say we need to have a centralized. That's really hard to do in a league that's got 130 teams. They can't even do that in the NFL with 32 teams. But make sure that the SEC knows this is how, we are responsible for hiring the crews to do our games and training them to do the job, and they are evaluated off of the standard that has been set bigger picture. I think that's what they need to do. So you need to commit at least a minimum number of dollars. You need to make these more full-time jobs, and then you can find things for them to do. Cross-train some of these guys to do other sports. So if you're doing football, then, teach them to do other things in the spring or something like that. I mean, you're paying them enough. You can get them to do that if you want to do that. But I think that's a big thing is you need to incentivize it, not just like the ACC is a joke. You want to know that bad officiating crews because they don't pay them jack. So anytime an officiating official really proves himself at that level, you're going to see them heading off to the Big Ten or other leagues because it's just they don't take care of them. So I think that's a big thing you can do is You can't hold them to a higher standard if you're not going to make it worth their while. Because then a lot of people that do this who are good at it, like, it's not worth it to me. It's not worth it to have to deal with this for what you're paying me. Give them full-time positions and really good salaries, and hey, there you go. And that's what I would say to do. Or we'll pay your salary, this, and you work for us. If you want to go do something on the side, some side hustle on the off season, as long as it's a legitimate thing. So yeah, I think that would be something that would help. But a centralized thing where the NCAA runs it all, that's too much. Every week you're going to have minimum 60 some games. You have at most 16 games a week in the NFL, right? At most. And a lot of weeks when you're going to have minimum 40, 50 games a week in the NCAA because bye weeks, and it's minimum 40, 50 games a week. And that's too many for one body. They can't even govern simple things that they should be easy to do. You think they're going to be able to take the time to? No, you set the standards, you'd make certain demands of the leagues, and then the leagues have to live up to it and run it themselves. That's what you need to do. They won't do it because they won't commit the money. Because again, we all know this. The leadership of college football are greedy SOBs, which is why we're where we are, because their greed led us to where now we've overcorrected way too far in the other direction because of their greed. They're not going to just start spending money on something like this, although they should, because it makes the product better. And when the product's better, you make even more money. That's why really good businessmen don't usually go run colleges, because they're too busy running successful businesses, not failed businesses, which is what colleges are, essentially.
Fair enough. Question from Liquid Gold ND. Can you give college pro comparisons for each of the three quarterbacks on the roster? What style does Denbrock covet the most? And do any of these three quarterbacks excel in it?
I don't really have compared. I'm not great. I've compared CJ Carr to Joe Burrow, not from the standpoint of I think he's going to throw for 6,000 yards and 61 touchdowns, but more so, similar size. Joe's a little thicker, but similar body type. Not a monster. Like Joe Burrow doesn't have Pat Mahomes' arm strength. He doesn't have Josh Allen's arm strength. He's more about timing and intelligence, and not that he doesn't have a strong arm, just like CJ's got a good arm, but it's more about quick release, being wicked smart, great anticipation, things like that. And CJ's more in that lines. If I had to come up with a comparison, and again, I'm not comparing him to Joe talent-wise. I'm not saying that if CJ Carr reaches his full potential, he's going to have a 2019 Joe Burrow season. That's not what I'm saying. Comparisons aren't ever meant to be that. They're just more so, if I could find a quarterback that has similar size and traits, like tools, that would be one that I would go with. I'm trying to remember. I had a comp for Kenny Minchie, and I'm trying to remember who it was. I think it might have been Baker. I'm trying to remember which one that was. But
yeah, a little bit bigger version of Baker Mayfield.
Yeah, I think that's what it was. I'm trying to find the commit profile I did for him. Let me see if it's this one. Let me see. Yeah, I wrote that story. Player comp. Baker Mayfield. Yeah, I just found the player comp that I did for him. He had, I graded him as a top 100 player, 4.5 star upside grade. My player comp's Baker Mayfield. Yeah. Really similar delivery. He's got a strong arm. Baker's a good athlete. Kenny's a better run. At the time, Kenny was like Baker, where he was a good athlete, but he used his athleticism to move around as a thrower. Kenny really didn't run in college or in high school like he did in the spring game and like he did against Purdue. He was more of using his athleticism to run around and buy time and create throws on the run. But Baker Mayfield was my comp. I don't know that I made one for Steve. I don't really have a good one for Steve. And I don't love those comps because you're talking about 2 number 1 draft picks and Heisman Trophy winners. It's like, I'm not saying they're going to have those careers. I'm just saying, like, stylistically, body type wise, those are similar comparisons.
Yeah, I've been while you've been rattling those off, because I had Joe Burrow as a comp for CJ Carr, just how they read, how they process, how they move around in the pocket. Baker, I could see for Kenny. But the entire time you were listing those off, I was just thinking of one for Steve Angeli, and I can't think of one. So then to answer the second part of your question, Liquid Gold, what style does Mike Denbrock covet the most? We've talked about it in a handful of other shows. And as popular as it is to get the mobile guy and everybody's trying to find the next Lamar Jackson or Kyler Murray at quarterback, Mike Denbrock wants somebody and honestly, based on the style of offense he has, needs somebody that can consistently push the ball down the field. They can read, scan the field at an elite level. They make good decisions. That's who Mike Denbrock needs under center. As fun as it was to watch Riley Leonard this year, hurdling guys and diving into the end zone and ripping off 20, 30 chunk yard runs, there's a reason why in almost every post-game show, we would take away, hey, did you see Riley miss this guy? And Mike Denbrock, for his style of offense, needs somebody that can process and read defenses at a high level. So I think that's what he covets the most.
John A1 had Sean Clifford as a comparison. That's not bad.
Okay.
That's not a bad one from Penn State. Not a super talented guy, but a winner, a gamer, a smart guy, a competitive guy, good athlete. That's not a bad one, John. That's not bad at all.
Decent.
That's better than anything I could come up with. Somebody else said Matt Ryan. No. And I'm only talking about like he's not Matt. Like Matt Ryan was way taller, way bigger, had a better arm. Steve's a much better athlete, I think, than Matt Ryan was. I don't know. There's a lot of comparisons there stylistically, and I'm not even saying like no, in that he's not nearly as good, because that's not what comps are meant to be, in my opinion. They're more stylistically. I think John Clifford's a little bit more.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
I like that one. I had a super chat from Michael S. How serious is Texas' attempt to get Mickens? Michael, I already addressed that one. We already addressed that one. Let's go here. Sorry, hey, Liquid Gold. I'm sorry I didn't have a better answer for that. I tried getting into comps the last couple of years, but I spend so much time kind of like forcing a comp. I just don't feel great about it. If one comes to me, then I'll say it like, oh, that's just a natural. Like I said this when I was, who was the guy I was watching recently? Oh man, what? Whoa, the Ebenezer Edewadi. I said, look, I'm watching him and just naturally in my head, I'm thinking Julian Okwara. I mean, just that's all I can think of is like I'm rewatching a senior film of Julian Okwara in Charlotte, and like that. It was natural. It's like just a natural comp. But I'm not great at that, honestly. And the problem too is I don't like doing it because every time you give a comp, people immediately say, you think he's going to be that good? No, I don't think a guy's going to throw for 6,000 yards and 60 touchdowns next year. But body type wise and arm talent wise, there's some similarities there. That's all I'm saying.
Question from Timeout. In my opinion, last year's wide receiver class wasn't elite. Is Coach Brown's recruiting showing signs of real improvement for the 2026 class?
I don't know that anybody's going to argue that it was elite. It definitely wasn't. It was a solid class that a team like Notre Dame should have better than. And here's the thing I said, Trev, and I know we agree on this. I have no problem with any of the kids they landed. They're all good football players. But they shouldn't be your 1, 2, and 3. Elijah Burris, I like him a lot. You know that. He shouldn't be your 1. Scrapper just shouldn't be your 2. They should be your 2 and your 3, not your 1 and your 2. They weren't that far off from having a really good receiver class. You all of a sudden throw, a Dalen McCutcheon in there, or let me just pull up the offer list again just to remind myself of some of the guys they were after. But it's like you land a couple of those guys that are just more impactful guys, and all of a sudden, we're having a different conversation about Notre Dame's receiver recruiting if they're the 2 and they're the 3. I just pulled up the scholarship chart, not the scholarship offers. That's my bad. But that's kind of my thing, Trev, is it's not so much that the guys they landed weren't good. It's that you just needed more. Let's say you'd added a Jamie French or a Dalen McCutcheon. I'm just trying to look through some guys that I had graded out really high. A Quincy Porter who's going to Ohio State. Talon Taylor, somebody like that. If you had one of those guys in the class, and then all of a sudden, those guys are your 2 and 3, we're having a much different conversation about where this Notre Dame receiver class was. So they weren't that far off. They just weren't. It just wasn't as good as it should have been or could have been, and needs to be, honestly. To answer the second part of the question, are we seeing signs that in 26 it's better? Absolutely. As far as at least putting the board together. Now, can they go out and, land these guys? Great question. But I love the board so far. It's just, They just got to close. But yes, I mean, the things we hear from different recruits about the relationship he's building with them, I think he's definitely a lot more comfortable now selling Notre Dame and the kind of guys he's looking for and all that kind of stuff. So it's very early, but I'm happy with the start they're off to. Now it's just about closing the deal.
Question from John A1. Emil Wagner just completed his first year as a starter. As a high school prospect, I believe he was graded with 5-star upside. Now that we've seen him in college, does he still have that upside to be elite?
Yeah, now keep in mind, what I consider elite is I grade guys on what they are going to be in college. I don't care about NFL draft projection. I'm not going to project a 17-year-old to the National Football League. I care about what they do in college. Do I think that by the time we're done at the end of 2026, that Emil Wagner could have a Liam Eichenberg type of career? Absolutely. Liam Eichenberg was a consensus All-American as a fifth-year senior, 3-year starter. That's an elite career. Now, is that Joe Alt's? But no, Joe Alt's not the only type of 5-star. Like, that's the thing is, this guy's not a Jeremiah Smith. Neither is anybody else. And if Jeremiah Smith is the only standard for 5-star, then guess what? There's not going to be but 3 or 4 5-stars every decade. It is kind of wild that those two were kind of from the same class once Ryan Williams, recommitted. But it's like, that's just like, there was a year in 2008 where it was, think about this, it was Michael Floyd, AJ Green, and Julio Jones were all in the same class with Jonathan Baldwin, DeVere Posey, Justin Blackman, Dan what was his name? Dan Buckner. I mean, it was an elite receiver class. That just because there's no Julio Jones or Michael Floyd or AJ Green the next year doesn't mean there aren't any 5-stars. There's just different types of 5-stars. And so I absolutely think Emil Wagner, if he continues to grow and develop, can get a little stronger, clean up his technique, could absolutely by the end of 2026 be a guy that we're looking at as an All-American caliber player. And that's a 5-star. And a guy that's just like, you just put him right there and he's just locking us up. Now, I could also see him getting beat out by Gerby Lambert if given the opportunity. But that's because Gerby's also a 5-star upside guy, but he's more of that 5-star upside college and also a top 10 NFL draft pick. But yeah, I could absolutely see that. Absolutely could see that. Yeah. There's nothing he's done that makes me think he's not what I thought he could be in college. I think he's athletic. He hasn't lost a lot of the athleticism. He's a guy that at times looks like he's not sure what he's doing, and he's light. So there's just going to be certain players that always give him problems. Just Robert Hainsey had some of that. Right? Robert Hainsey was really good. But if he went up against a 275-pound twitchy athletic edge, he was going to have some trouble against that guy because he was 295 pounds. So, but yeah, length is elite. He's got some punch. He's got to get stronger. There's a difference between like your natural power and then the additional weight room strength that comes with it. He's got athleticism. He's got, we saw that. I mean, talk about punch. He struggles with like head-on-head power because of his size. That's going to get better. But you talk about the play against Jack Sawyer. He literally, with one arm, lifts Jack Sawyer off the ground and throws him. You're like, all right, that's that dude. The issue that I have is that people are like, well, he's always going to start. Well, what if Gerby's better? What can't we acknowledge that Emil is really good, but what if someone's better? Shouldn't we start the better guy? But at the same, then there's the flip side of the people that are like, well, he wasn't perfect as a first-year sophomore, so let's bench him for the 5-star who's never played a meaningful down. Both of those sides is where the argument is right now. They're both wrong. It's Emil showed me a lot this year. He also showed me in the playoffs he's still got to get a lot better. So we're still talking about upside right now. He's still more of that top 250. So here's Emil's grade. I grade him as a 4-star top 250 guy, which is good, but not elite. But he's got 5-star upside. Right now, he looked like a guy that ranks in the 250 range. That's what he looked like. He's going to win against most of the good players, but when he goes against 5-stars or top 100 guys, he's going to get beat. That's what he looked like this year. Now, as he taps more into his upside, now he starts dominating more and more of those matchups, or at least handling more. Because if you're a 5-star tackle going against a 5-star end, your goal isn't to dominate him. Your goal is to just win. Don't let him make plays. I don't need to dominate him. I just need to get in his way. Now, if I'm a 5-star too, I can make that happen. But if I'm a top 250 guy, like going against Abdul Carter, we'll get my butt whooped. Right? That's But if he played like a 5-star, he doesn't dominate Emil Carter from the standpoint of like he's driving him off the ball and he's throwing him down. No, it's just you kept him from getting to my quarterback. That's you did your job. He has that type of upside still. There's nothing I saw this year that doesn't make me think that over the next couple of years he can't, if he keeps working, become that type of player. That he's still on that track. The only question is going to be, but what if somebody else is better? That's the only question to this. And if it wasn't for the presence of a guy like Emil Wagner, there'd be a lot more excitement. If it wasn't for the presence of Gerby Lambert and Will Black, there'd be a lot more excitement amongst the fan base about what Emil Wagner is going to be next year going into year 2. That's just the nature of fandom. They're going to see that shiny new toy, that 5-star, 6'7", 320-pound guy. Like, well, what about that guy? Well, that guy should get a shot to start. That guy should get a shot to battle for starting job, but he better be better than Emil in practice because I know what Emil can do.
Yeah.
He's going to have to show me that he can be even better.
Look, welcome to the day and age of having an elite level program. That's what it is. Notre Dame, when you get the caliber of recruits that they do, especially at the offensive line position, it's always going to be that. What I've always said about recruits, and I do not want to pretend like recruiting is my wheelhouse, but what I've always said, even before I was with Irish Breakdown, is everybody always wants the immediate return. Everybody always wants the true freshman Devontae Smith that catches a game winner in the national championship. Everybody wants the Ben Morrison true freshman. And at some positions that can be. It's really hard to do as an offensive lineman because the level of the game is so different. You're going again. You look at some of the film of high school offensive linemen. Some of them go up against pretty good talent. Others are going against a 6-foot-tall, 230-pound edge rusher that has pre-calculus on Monday. And then you go up to the collegiate level and it's like, oh, okay, so now I'm going up against Nazir Stackhouse, so it's just the adjustment period is different. But I see too many times people are real high on a guy because they have 5-star upside. Like we saw it this season with Cam Williams. Cam Williams didn't play football as an 18-year-old, and now everybody's like, oh, so I guess he's just not a good player. It's like, okay, well, let's wait. You're in college for at least 3 years. Who knows what happens? So that's how I view Emil Wagner. And John, I'm not saying that you were saying this. It's just this sparked the thought that I had is just, look, he was the only offensive lineman that started all 16 games. Just because he wasn't Quentin Nelson, I don't think now it's time to start talking about, well, he was just always going to be a top 250 guy, not a top 100, top 50 guy. So I say all that to say, be patient. Yeah, I think Emil's going to be really good. Tommy Guns, will we ever see hot route calls where you replace the blitzer with the receiver and throw placement? Thinking about the second or third to last possession against Penn State.
Yeah, we literally saw those this year. That's a part of what they do. I'm not a big fan of hot routes from the standpoint of we're running this concept, and if there's I'm running a post corner route, but if they do this, I'm running a blitz. I'm converting to a slant behind it. I'm not a big fan of that because that requires a lot of nuance from a college receiver that I don't love. There are certain offenses where that's easier to do because it's kind of already similar to what you're doing. You're running a lot of quick game. Like in the old West Coast offense, that was really easy to do because so much of what you were doing was like, I was going to run a quick out, now I'm just going to run a quick in. It was kind of natural to do it. A lot of the modern offenses, it's not quite as easy to do that. And a lot of offenses have kind of built-in blitz beaters already anyway, whether it's protection or RPOs. There's a lot of different things you can do. But, yeah, they'll have some of that. They'll have some of that where, hey, I'm running this route, but I'm just going to break it off a little bit short because there's a blitz coming. Yeah, you see that. But what happens is it's, to me, the risk is not worth the reward. Because I can do other things where I think this guy's going to break off a slant. He's running a seam. I think he's going to break off a slant. I got to rush that throw out there because the blitz is coming, and he doesn't convert the slant to the slant. So I end up throwing it, and that safety coming down steps in front of it and picks it off. with college kids, it's just not, the risk isn't worth the reward, in my opinion, especially with them having so many fewer hours to study film since the rules several years ago that limit the amount of time they can spend in practice and with coaches and stuff like that. So it's just not worth it to me to that degree. There are some offenses where that's a lot more natural, and you can do it at times, and teams will still do it, and Notre Dame will still do it. But that's why you're seeing teams more build in blitz beaters. That's why you're seeing more teams run RPOs, because it's kind of, that's what an RPO is. It's like, listen, we're running this. If that guy blitzes, we're throwing the glance route right behind it, or whatever the case may be. And the glance route is really reading the defense. A glance route is not like a slant. People say, look, it's a slant. It's not a slant, it's a glance. The reason that there's a difference is because a slant route is a slant route. It is what it is. A glance route can be run differently. You can bend it. It can look like a slant. And a lot of it's built. The adjustment is built around what's the defense doing around you, and so that's why it's a different type of route that is almost like kind of like a hot route to a degree, or it can turn into a hot route depending on what the defense is doing.
Question from Nicholas Grosh.
Groach. I think is what it is. Yeah.
Should Notre Dame target a defensive tackle in the portal?
No, I don't think so, Nicholas. Because he's obviously asking on top of the two that they've already gotten. Should they go for one in the spring? Here's my stance on this. There are certain players that if they jump into the portal, you kind of have to look at that guy. Like, yeah, you like the kid you have, but that guy could be a game changer for you. Then sure, you look at that. But do they need to? I'm of the belief that no, they don't. I mean, look, first of all, keep working with Jason Onye to get his life back on track and get him back on the football field. And I care more about getting his life on track. And if the byproduct of that is him playing football again, then awesome. He can help you. You've got Jared Dawson. You've got Elijah Hughes, who you got in the portal, who has more years of eligibility left, on top of having – so those are kind of like newcomers. And Jason Onye, I count as a newcomer, meaning like what you had the last 10 games of the season, he wasn't it. On top of having Gabriel Rubio and Donovan Heinisch. After that, it's like, look, you've got Armo Mukum, you've got Sean Sevillano, you've got Brennan Vernon, you've got Devin Houston, and then you're bringing in Davion Dixon. Gordy Solstad's a guy that has a really high ceiling at D-tackle, but he's like a down-the-road project. He's not a 2025 guy. You've got Cole Mullins also there. Of all those guys, if you can't get one of those guys ready, you've got a coaching problem, in my opinion. And I'm not saying they do. I'm saying, like, I would rather tell Al Washington, look, we know these guys are there, but dude, number 88, and first of all, I'd move Brendan Vernon to defensive end. I think that's where he should be. I don't like him there, but so let's move him outside. But between number 88 and number 98 and number 59 and number 42, along with the 320-pound incoming freshman who had like 15 sacks in Miami last year, bro, if you can't get one of them guys ready to play, if not two, then we need to have a conversation about what your coaching strategy is. I would rather see that, because if you get Armo Mukum ready, coached up, you got him for 3 years. If you got Sean Sevillano coached up, you got him for 4. Devin Houston you got for 3. Cole Mullins you'd have for 4. Coach those guys up. There's talent there. You just got to coach it up. And so that's where I would rather focus on, is that. I would rather the reps go to those guys, unless, like I said, there's that guy that jumps in who likes your program that you're just like, we can't in good faith turn that down. It's not fair to the rest of the team to turn that guy down. But to go out and get a second Jared Dawson or an RJ Oben type, or just a good solid player, like if you can go get Braden Fisk, get Braden Fisk. But I don't know that there's that guy out there. I don't know that I'm bringing in Travis Shaw if he jumped in the portal like in the spring instead of in the winter. Yeah, he's got a lot of tools, but he didn't produce. Like, sure, NFL draft people might love him, but like I like guys that actually play good football. And so there's certain guys that if they could jump in, yeah, you got to do that. But otherwise, I'm like, hey, I know a 6'4", 310-pound guy with a lot of athleticism that's got a lot of tools. You know what his name is? His name's Armo Mukum. He's right down the hall. Go coach him up. That's what I would do. Unless there's just that dude, man, like, oh my gosh, that guy comes in and he's by far our best player day one. If that guy's out there and he likes your program, yeah, you kind of got to do it. You owe it to the rest of the team to do that. And That's just the way that it is.
Got to be a needle mover. It can't just be somebody to add to the room because you have a lot in it already. So it's got to be somebody that moves the needle. Has to be. I'm with you.
Yep.
Matt S., do you think the pick in the Northern Illinois loss ruined Riley Leonard's confidence the rest of the season? It seemed like every time he dropped back, he was in run-first mode.
I don't think so. I mean, the next game he went out there, he made some pretty impressive throws that next week, and they, 3 weeks later he made some dimes against Louisville. I think what that did is more it had him. I think there was for a time this is true, but not for the whole season. I think you even saw early against Purdue a couple of the easy misses he had early against Purdue and Miami of Ohio. You saw that it was kind of in his head a little bit. I think a lot of that was just him getting his rhythm back, him learning the offense, him going on the same page with the receivers. I don't think Riley lacked confidence after the bye week. I mean, like you watch him against Stanford, there was no lack of confidence in that game. There was no lack of confidence against Georgia Tech. There was no lack of confidence against Navy. There was even no lack of confidence against Penn State and Ohio State. It just at times it was just like he wasn't reading it really well. And I think that's more experience in the system, timing. And I think if anything affected him the remainder of the season, I think the only thing where I thought he lacked confidence was not in himself. I think at times he didn't show a great deal of confidence that he was going to get the ball out and that guy was going to catch it. So he would just run it. And I also think even bigger, I think, Trevor, I think you were getting ready to say it. Go ahead and say it. Go ahead and say it. Because like we're on the same page.
Yeah, I think his lack of confidence also came in the pass protection. I mean, when you're getting forklifted into your starting quarterback's lap in a quick game, I also wouldn't have a whole lot of confidence to drop back and hit backside digs. Not saying that he did it before or even after, but it's just that played a big part. You had 6 different offensive line combinations across 16 games. And one of them happened before your first game. So I say all that to say, I don't think it was just the pick against Northern Illinois. I think some of it too was the coaching staff had to figure out what worked best for Riley Leonard. We talked about Mike Denbrock figuring out and tailoring his offense to what went well with him. And so some of it, I think, was a little bit of gun shyness from the coaching staff. I mean, Marcus Freeman went out against Miami of Ohio, and Riley Leonard was in an interview that week and said, I want to go and prove that that's behind me and I want to let it fly today. And the head coach said, we just need him to stay within the offense, not do anything crazy, and just run the plays that are called. Like that has nothing to do with Riley Leonard's lack of confidence. So I do think, Matt, to your point, I think confidence was a factor in it, but I don't think that it was in against USC. He was seeing flashbacks of the interception against NIU at any point in time.
Not for sustained. Yeah, I agree with that.
Tommy Guns, will the new running back coach put any emphasis on carrying the ball in the outside arm? So many missed stiff arm opportunities over the last few years.
I think Dylan McCullough did a pretty good job of that. I think the only guy that wasn't great at that was Jadarian. That's my biggest complaint with Jadarian is he tends to not do that, and he misses some of those stiff arm. I think Jeremiah was pretty good at putting the ball in the outside arm.
So was Aeneas.
Yeah, I think so. Kedron's pretty good. I think that was more of a Jadarian problem. I think they've done a pretty good job of that. And I hope that Coach Sider continues to do that. Yes. Yeah, that's a big pet peeve of mine for running backs and receivers. Now, once you get through the line, you're not doing it as you get through the line, and as soon as you get through the line, a guy's coming to the side. No, it's more of a once you get through the line and you make that okay, now I'm in space. That's when the ball has to go there. Because you go from here to where that ball is. I'm also not someone who loves switching the ball in the middle of a run. If you're wide open, sure. You're because like sometimes it's like you're running inside zone and you're thinking it's going to pop right, but then it pops left. Sometimes that's going to result in you not having the ball in the right arm. It's part of it. I don't want you changing it as you're cutting up for a 12-yard gain. I don't want you changing it till you're in space. And then, so sometimes it's going to work out that way. You don't overthink it or overcoach it. But by and large, I do think that was missing more so when Autry Denson was coach and Lance Taylor was a coach. because Autry was that way. Autry was not that was an issue he had as a player, and his players had that. It's like, how do you tell Autry Denson he was wrong? The guy was Notre Dame's all-time leading rusher. You know what I mean? Like, okay, it worked for you. Doesn't mean it's going to work for the next guy. But just because it worked doesn't mean it can't be better also. But
sure.
I don't get as frustrated about that as much with the running backs. That the receivers have done more of that that's frustrated me than the running backs, to be completely honest with you. This is a good question from Chris H. This is a good one.
Yeah. Who are the leaders on offense in 2025?
I mean, that's Chris. We talked a lot about the excitement on the pass game, but that is one of the question marks about the offense moving forward. I do think that there's two that I feel comfortable for sure saying right now are established leaders or very close to. The way we've watched Jaden Greathouse conduct himself in practice and different things like that, I think he's already established himself as a leader of this team. And then you throw in the big game production. Now the production matches the work ethic and the leadership and the example he sets. He's there already. I think Jeremiah Love showed a lot of leading by example most of this year, but you started to see him do more of the vocal leadership at times also late in the season when it was needed. I think he shows me leadership ability, also knowing the character he has and knowing his family and just kind of how he was raised. He was raised to kind of have a lot of that internal strength and leadership and focus and maturity. So I think he is there. Quarterback, I don't care as much about leadership, but if I'll say this about Steve Angeli, if Steve Angeli has the right attitude this year, win or lose the battle, I think Steve Angeli can provide your offense with leadership even if he's not the starter. Now, I don't know if he's going to stick around if he's not the starter. That's always a question with every kid that doesn't start everywhere. But if he's the starting quarterback, one thing I can guarantee about Steve Angeli, I don't know if he's going to be able to be a big-time passer. And there's like a battle going on Twitter that I just saw. Somebody, it's like that these Steve Angeli fans are just like the most annoying people on the planet. It's like, I'm willing to admit his strengths. You won't admit his weaknesses. It's just like, he's like this, like, do you really think Notre Dame coaches are that stupid that's why they went? I mean, if he was that as good as you say he is, Notre Dame was stupid to go get Riley Leonard in the portal. It's hilarious. But the one thing I can say, I've said a lot about, I got questions about this. There's one thing I will never doubt. If Steve Angeli is the starting quarterback in Notre Dame, you will freaking have a C on his chest. If he wins the starting quarterback battle this year, you put a C on that kid's chest, because leadership is never a question, in my opinion, with Steve Angeli. If he's your starting quarterback, not a question. So I think you'll have him in that conversation too. Now, the danger is if you put a C on his chest and he gets beat out in game 5, but as long as he's got the right attitude and you say, look, man, like we want to make you a captain, even if you're not the starter. If he's willing to commit to that, okay. I think he could earn that right, but he could have some leadership traits up front. I think there's some bigger questions for me. Maybe Wagner, maybe Schrouth, but I think those guys all still have a lot to prove to me. A lot to prove from a consistency standpoint, leadership standpoint, doing the right thing standpoint, not in a bad way, but just more of like how you're going about your business on the field. I want them kind of still focusing on themselves, not being captains. I think between whoever your quarterback is, Love and Greathouse, I think that's enough now. But I do think leadership needs to emerge in the O-line room just with themselves. Forget the captain part. Who's going to be that? Who's going to be the leader in workouts? Who's going to be the leader meeting, going over film? Who's that guy? Is that Emil? Is that – because that's the first guy that pops in my head is actually Emil, not Billy. But then Billy's next, and then Ashton Craig maybe. Those are guys that kind of look at first and foremost. But if any offensive lineman was going to emerge as a captain next year, if I had to predict who it would be, I'd probably say Emil. Just with what you hear about his work ethic and his attitude and his maturity, he'd probably be my first guess. And he'll be a senior next year, so that would make some sense. So I think there's actually more candidates next year as a whole than there was this year. We're really the only two leaders that I felt good about saying were leaders. I mean, you had Coogan, but you didn't know if he was going to start. Rocco, but he didn't know if he was going to start. Riley Leonard and Jane Thomas. So 3 of your top 4 quote-unquote leaders were guys we weren't even sure we're going to start this year. And started the season, not as starters. Next year, I think there's more dudes that are poised to be leaders. And with Jeremiah Love, it's not naming a captain because he's your best player. It's because he provides you leadership. It's not a reward for being a great runner. You don't put the C on his chest for that. You put the C on his chest because, bro, we're counting on you to lead us. Now, how you do that may be different than Great House or how Riley was or how, Drake Bowen may be or somebody else on defense may be. You got to lead your way, but we need you to be a leader. It means there's accountability. That means there's just being the man in the room. There's all types of things that go with that, doing it your way. I have more confidence. There's more dudes next year that could be captains than I did this year, where a lot of your leaders were like really solid players, but they weren't like Jaden Thomas and Rocco and Pat Coogan, but they weren't your dudes. And I've always felt if your dudes can also be leaders, you got a chance to have a really good football team from a leadership standpoint. Not that your dudes are your captains, because you can put a C on the chest of anybody. That doesn't make you a leader. The C doesn't make you a leader. The C should just be a representation of your leadership already shown. But you and I both know sometimes you put a C on a guy's chest just to make him happy, even though he's not necessarily an established leader.
Oh, sure.
I haven't noted. I don't think that's not something I felt about during the Marcus Freeman era. And if you thought maybe that was true for Benjamin Morrison, that got eliminated if you watched any of the Here Come the Irish episodes, because you just saw leadership just ooze through that kid. You're just like, yeah, no, he's actually a leader, not just your best player. So that's how I feel about him.
Yeah, you and I are in the same boat with that, man. I think you can look on offense specifically, and I think you can be siloed into two different verticals. You have your vocal leaders, and you'll have your leaders by example. And I think you're going to have more leaders by example in the offensive line room. However, to your point, Brian, somebody has to emerge as the vocal leader in that room. But I think you have more spread out through across the skill positions. Jaden Greathouse, Malachi Fields was a captain at Virginia. He brings those traits along with him into that offense. Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price both, but more so Jeremiah. He became a vocal leader in the playoffs, which I think something is to be said about that, because sometimes when you play at a level like what he did in the regular season, but then you had the postseason that Jeremiah did, outside of the 98-yard touchdown run and one of the most high-effort plays in that 2-yard touchdown run against Penn State, he didn't have the performance. There was a lot of reasons for that. Some offensive line fluctuation. He was banged up, but he still remained a leader. And sometimes when you see guys that play at an elite level that don't perform well in like the biggest moments, they kind of get in their feelings a little bit. And Jeremiah Love was anything but that. And so he would be a leading candidate for me as well.
That's that maturity thing I'm talking about, Trevor. It's not all about Jeremiah. Does he want his touches? Of course he does. If he didn't, I'd have bigger issues with him not caring about getting the ball than I would with him being a bit of a drama queen if he's not getting the ball enough.
Sure.
Like, I'd rather deal with the guy that wants the ball all the time and doesn't always handle it the right way than a guy that's like, whatever. If you want to give me the ball, it's fine. It's like, no. But I love the guy that wants the ball, but then also handles himself as a great teammate when he's not getting it. That's what I like. If you watch some, and that's where I think the Here Come the Irish stuff was really eye-opening to us as fans, because you see how Jeremiah and Jadarian interact with each other on the sideline, where Jeremiah is not like, man, I should have got that ball that Jadarian just took to the house, and vice versa. It's like they celebrate that with each other. It's like that's why that can work. Even though you got two number ones, that's why that can work, because they both look at it that way. And that's where that, team success brings individual glory, but the team success has to be your focus first. Last three, and then we're going to get out of here. Speaking of captains, this one from Josh Buffalo, the motivational business banker. Is Drake Bowen a lock to get a C this season? I would say as long as he's coming out of spring as the starter, I would say yes.
Yeah.
I think that's a pretty easy one.
Agreed.
Nothing's a lock. He still has a lot to prove, but he'd be my leading candidate to be a captain on defense. Honestly, my top two candidates would probably be going into next season of the returners. My top two candidates to be a captain next year would probably be two true juniors, Drake and Adon.
Mm-hmm.
Like, just thinking about it, I mean, like, those are just naturally come to me. Like, oh, it's those two. After that, it's like, okay, maybe Josh Burnham. maybe a Batelho if he who knows where kind of he is. Maybe a Heinisch. Maybe a Christian. Maybe a captain. Maybe a transfer. Maybe Jalen Stroman comes in and shows great leadership ability. Maybe there's a lot of maybes. There's two that are just oh yeah, that guy and that guy. Yep, those two right there. It's Adon and Drake. Those are no-brainers for me. No-brainers. Who else is going to be? It depends on off seasons, but as long as they're starting, those two guys are top of my list. Agree?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, those two guys pop off the page when you start talking about that stuff. I'm with you.
What's funny is, in my opinion, your four most likely captains for next season, just for me, just my opinion, the four guys on the team that are most likely, like I'll be surprised if they're not captains, are all true juniors, which presents a very unique circumstance for Marcus Freeman. But if you were to ask me right now, who are the four most likely captains on your team? The only non-true junior that I would really strongly consider is Steve, but I can't put him there because I don't know that I can name him a captain if he's not my starting quarterback. It would just depend on a lot of conversations he and I would have. But if he wins the starting quarterback job, then you throw Steve in there. But of the guys that are just, they're going to start, or you feel probably going to start, and they're just the most obvious leaders, it's four juniors. It's Jaden Greathouse, Jeremiah Love, Adon Schuler, and Drake Bowen. I don't know that I've ever been in this. And it's not because there's not seniors that are capable of it. It's just those guys are just like the natural, like they immediately gravitate to the front of the room. And Jaden was doing that as a sophomore. Adon was doing that as a sophomore. Drake was doing that as a sophomore. And it's more of their natural leadership ability as opposed to a lack of potential leaders. Like, Emil has some of that. There's guys that have some of that, but those guys just, to me, naturally are just front of the room guys. And they're true juniors. That's impressive. That's more of a compliment to them than it is any kind of knock on older players. It's more of a praise.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I agree.
Yep.
Question from Texas Mac. How long will competition last through the fall? Talk about quarterback competition.
Yeah, into the fall. I would expect. I think by the end of spring we'll kind of have an idea of who the leader is, but it won't be so far ahead that it's like it's a no-brainer, it's a done deal. And then I think we'll see how it goes over the summer. There'll be some competition then. Who has the better summer? I would be shocked if we don't know who the starter is by. Now, again, I don't care who they announce as the starter. I'm talking about if the team doesn't know who the starter is by the end of the second week of fall camp. I'll be shocked if it goes past that. Now, again, they may play lip service to it, but we'll know. We'll know. Like that, or the players will know. You said it yesterday, or was it Sean that said it? I don't care if we know who the starter is until August 31st. Don't care. As long as the team knows who it is much longer than that. That's all I care about. That's all that matters to me. But in that regard, I should be shocked if it goes past the first couple of weeks of fall camp.
I'm in the same boat. I just don't want the team or the coaching staff to be in a spot where they're going in through fall camp and it's, hey, who's the starting quarterback going to be? Not the media asking, but them asking themselves internally. And they're like, I don't know. As long as they know, I'm kosher. But, yeah. Yep.
And then last one here from John A1.
Is Gerby Lambert a pure tackle, or can he be effective inside like Charles Jagasaw?
I think he could be. The only thing I ever worry about with guys like Jagasaw and Gerby is their height. But if they were like, hey, listen, look, we want to have Jagasaw at left tackle and Emil's locked down right tackle, and we're really worried about Ashton Craig's knee and how healthy he'll be. We want to put Knapp there to battle, but we want to move somebody else to right guard to battle with Sullivan, Absher, and Tarek, and we want to give Gerby a shot to start, but we think the tackle spots are locked down. I would absolutely give Gerby Lambert a shot to start at guard. Absolutely. If he's one, he could be one of your best five and play there. Now, I still think he's a quote unquote natural tackle, but I think a natural tackle can play guard in a zone type of offense, because natural tackle doesn't inherently mean to me not big. It just means you're athletic, you're long, you're powerful, and you're comfortable in space. That doesn't mean you can't play guard. So I would absolutely, if I didn't feel comfortable letting him beat out Emil, because I felt Emil was one of our best 5, and I don't think you want to move Emil to guard, although I wouldn't be completely against moving Emil to guard. Then I would say, yeah, I'd be comfortable moving Gerby inside. Look, I just think him and Jagasol need to be in the lineup together at some point in time in the very near future. And I honestly don't care where it is. Like, if you wanted to move Jagasol to right guard because you think Gerby was ready to step in at left tackle, or you think Emil was ready to move over to left tackle, and Gerby, I don't care what the scenario is. I just feel like at some point in time, I really want to see those two guys in the lineup together. That's where I'm at. But yeah, he could do that. If you really felt like he was one of your best 5 and you just had to figure out a way to get him on the field, I'd have no quarrels moving him inside the guard. Doesn't mean you don't think he can eventually be a tackle. It just means right now we need to get him on the field, and I'd rather have him be a starting guard than a backup tackle. That's how I look at it.
I'm with you. A guy like Gerby Lambert's too talented to keep off the field for an extended period of time.
Yeah.
So I'm with you.
If he's putting in the work and all that, yes, correct. Agree with you.
Absolutely.
Well, hey,
all right,
we're gonna
guys.
get out of here even before IB Nation Sports Talk. So let's roll, Trev. Go ahead, man. Take us out of here.
Look at us. Well, hey, really good submissions today, guys. It was a really fun show. All of these conversations are going to continue over on the message boards. But thank you guys for being with us just a hair under about 4 hours here. We will be back here tomorrow at 1. We have the buy, sell, hold because it'll be Wednesday. But before we get there, guys, be sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, share this podcast with your friends and family, whichever platform you watch us on, whether it be Spotify podcasts or Apple podcasts. Please be sure to leave us a 5-star review. We'd greatly appreciate it. The best way to support what we do here is subscribe to the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Also tonight, be sure to check out IB Nation Sports Talk. They'll be going live here relatively soon. But until tomorrow at 1, that's Bryan. I'm Trevor. We will see you back here very soon on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.